The emergency room lights flickered once, then steadied, casting harsh shadows across the pediatric ward where Ethan Vale had exactly 14 seconds to choose between his daughter's desperate phone call and the billionaire standing in front of him who could destroy everything he'd worked for. His phone buzzed again. Chloe's babysitter, third time in 10 minutes, and Victoria Sinclair's ice-blue eyes narrowed as she watched his hand twitch toward his pocket during her mandatory staff briefing about eliminating weakness from her newly acquired hospital. Before we begin, if you're watching from Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, or anywhere in between, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's find out what happens when a single father fighting to survive meets a woman who's never lost a battle in her life. The coffee in Ethan's thermos had gone cold 3 hours ago, but he kept drinking it anyway because it gave his hand something to do besides shake. Tuesday nights were always the worst. Understaffed, overcrowded, and somehow the universe always decided Tuesday was the perfect time to send every sick kid in Cook County through the emergency department doors. He stood in the back of the conference room on the 3rd floor, as far from the podium as physically possible, while 47 other nurses and hospital staff packed themselves into rows of folding chairs that squeaked every time someone shifted their weight. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and anxiety. Most people were checking their phones. A few were whispering. Everyone looked exhausted. Victoria Sinclair stood at the front like a statue carved from ambition and designer suits. She was 30 years old, which made her younger than half the people in the room, and she'd bought Riverside Children's Hospital 6 weeks ago the way normal people bought coffee. Quickly, efficiently, and without much visible emotion. The press called her a visionary. The staff called her other things, usually in the break room after she'd left the building. "We're implementing new performance standards," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the murmur of side conversations like a scalpel through skin. Effective immediately. All staff will be evaluated quarterly based on metrics that include patient turnover rates, supply efficiency, and adherence to protocol during high-stress situations. Ethan felt his phone vibrate in his scrub pocket. He ignored it. "This hospital has been hemorrhaging money for 3 years," Victoria continued, clicking to the next slide on the projector behind her. Red numbers filled the screen. Patient outcomes are down. Operational costs are up. Insurance complaints have increased by 32%. These are not abstract problems. These are failures. Someone near the front coughed. Victoria didn't even glance in their direction. "I didn't purchase this facility to watch it circle the drain," she said. "I purchased it because it has potential. But potential means nothing without execution. And execution requires discipline." Ethan's phone buzzed again. He shifted his weight, felt the vibration stop, and tried to focus on what Victoria was saying about synergistic restructuring or operational pivots or whatever business. School terminology she was currently using to explain why everyone's job was probably about to get significantly harder. Then his phone buzzed a 3rd time. And this time, it didn't stop. Ethan's stomach dropped. 3 calls in under 10 minutes wasn't normal. Sarah, Chloe's babysitter, wouldn't call repeatedly unless something was actually wrong. She knew his schedule. She knew he couldn't answer during rounds or briefings. She knew... "You..." Victoria's voice snapped across the room like a whip crack. Ethan looked up and found her staring directly at him. "Yes, you in the back?" Victoria said, her tone flat and precise. "The one who's been checking his phone for the last 90 seconds instead of paying attention." Every head in the room turned. 47 pairs of eyes locked onto Ethan like searchlights. "I wasn't..." Ethan started. "You weren't what?" Victoria interrupted. "You weren't holding your phone? You weren't clearly distracted during a mandatory meeting about patient safety and operational standards?" Ethan felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. His phone was still buzzing in his pocket like a trapped wasp. "I apologize. There's a situation." "There's always a situation," Victoria said. She took 3 steps forward, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. That's the excuse everyone uses when they prioritize their personal lives over their professional responsibilities. But let me be very clear about something. When you're in this building, wearing that uniform, your personal life does not exist. Your patients exist. Your colleagues exist. Your duty exists. Everything else is a distraction. Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel his phone still vibrating, still buzzing, still screaming at him that something was wrong with his daughter and he was standing here being, lectured about professionalism by a woman who probably hadn't worked a bedside shift in her entire life. "Do you understand?" Victoria asked. "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "I don't think you do," Victoria replied. She was closer now, standing at the end of his row, close enough that he could see the absolute zero temperature in her expression. "Because if you understood, you wouldn't be standing here making excuses. You'd be demonstrating the kind of focus and commitment that this hospital desperately needs." The phone stopped buzzing. The silence felt worse. "I apologize," Ethan said again, and he hated how small his voice sounded. Victoria studied him for a long moment, her gaze moving from his face to his rumpled scrubs to the hospital ID badge clipped to his chest pocket. "Ethan Vale," she read aloud, "pediatric overnight nurse, 3 years at this facility." She looked back up at him. "Would you like to keep working here, Mr. Vale?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Then I suggest you start acting like it," Victoria said. "Because the next time I catch you prioritizing phone calls over patient care, you won't just be embarrassed in front of your colleagues. You'll be unemployed." She turned back toward the podium without waiting for a response. The meeting continued. Victoria talked about new scheduling systems, updated protocols, mandatory training sessions. Ethan stood in the back and heard approximately none of it, because all he could think about was Chloe and Sarah and whatever emergency had just happened in his apartment 12 miles away while he stood here getting destroyed in front of everyone he worked with. When the meeting finally ended 40 minutes later, Ethan was the first person out the door. He made it halfway down the hall before his phone rang again. "Sarah?" he answered, not bothering to hide the panic in his voice. "Oh, thank God!" Sarah's voice came through shaky and too fast. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I know you're at work, but Chloe woke up crying, and she's saying her chest hurts and she's breathing weird, and I didn't know if I should call an ambulance or, well..." "Slow down," Ethan said, already moving toward the stairwell because the elevators were always too slow. "Is she conscious?" "Yes, but she's really scared, and I don't..." "Check her pulse," Ethan said. "Put your fingers on her wrist and count for 15 seconds. He heard rustling, then Sarah's voice, quieter now, talking to Chloe. "Sweetie, I need you to give me your arm, okay? Just for a second." "Just Ashram." Ethan took the stairs 2 at a time, his shoulder hitting the metal railing as he turned the corner between floors. His shift didn't end for another 6 hours. He'd already used both his breaks this week covering for other staff. If he left early, especially after what just happened in that meeting, Victoria Sinclair would absolutely make good on her threat to fire him. But this was Chloe. 23 beats, Sarah said, coming back on the line. Ethan did the math in his head. 92 beats per minute. Elevated, but not dangerously so. "Is she warm?" "A little, yeah." "Any coughing?" "No, just the chest pain and the breathing thing." Ethan reached the ground floor and shoved through the stairwell door into the main corridor. The overnight charge nurse, Marcus, was standing at the central desk reviewing charts. He looked up when Ethan approached. "I need to leave," Ethan said. Marcus frowned. "Your shift ends at 6. "I know. It's my daughter." "Is it an emergency?" "I don't know yet," Ethan said honestly, "but I need to go home and find out." Marcus studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You know we're short-staffed tonight." "I know." "And you know Victoria Sinclair personally threatened to fire you about 30 minutes ago." "Yeah," Ethan said. "I was there." Marcus shook his head slowly, like he was watching someone make a terrible decision in slow motion. "If you leave, I have to report it." "Then report it," Ethan said. "But I'm leaving." He didn't wait for permission. He just turned and walked toward the staff locker room, peeling off his hospital ID as he went. He changed out of his scrubs in under 2 minutes, threw on jeans and a jacket that smelled like the inside of his locker, and headed for the parking garage. The drive home took 25 minutes through light traffic and every red light in Chicago. Ethan spent the entire ride on speakerphone with Sarah, walking her through what to look for, listening to Chloe's breathing in the background, trying to stay calm while his brain cycled through every worst-case scenario his nursing training had ever taught him. By the time he pulled into his apartment complex, Sarah had managed to get Chloe calmed down enough to lie quietly on the couch with her favorite blanket. Ethan took the stairs to the third floor and burst through the door to find his 7-year-old daughter looking small and pale against the couch cushions. "Hey, kiddo," Ethan said, forcing his voice to stay gentle. Chloe looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "My chest hurts." "I know," Ethan said. He sat down next to her and pressed the back of his hand against her forehead. Slightly warm, but nothing alarming. "Can you show me where?" Chloe put her small hand against the center of her chest, right over her sternum. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He spent the next 10 minutes doing an assessment right there on the couch, checking her pulse, her breathing, her color, asking questions about pain levels, and whether anything felt tight or squeezed or different. Sarah watched from the kitchen doorway, her backpack already on her shoulders, clearly waiting to be released from the most stressful babysitting shift of her college career. "You did great," Ethan told her, pulling two 20s from his wallet, even though they'd agreed on $15 for the night. "Seriously, thank you for calling." Sarah took the money and practically fled. Ethan turned back to Chloe, who was watching him with that particular expression kids get when they know something's wrong but they're trying to be brave about it. "Am I going to be okay?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, Ethan said, and he hoped it was true. "But we're going to keep a close eye on you tonight, all right? You're sleeping in my room, and if anything feels worse, you wake me up immediately." "Okay." "I mean it, Chloe. Even if it's 3 in the morning and you think I'm tired, you wake me up." "I will," Chloe promised. She fell asleep around 2 a.m., curled up in Ethan's bed while he sat in the chair by the window and watched her breathe. Every inhale, every exhale, counting them like prayer. He'd been doing this for 3 years now, ever since the accident that took his wife and left him alone with a 4-year-old who asked when mommy was coming home and didn't understand why daddy kept crying in the bathroom with the shower running. The doctors had called it a miracle that Chloe survived it all. Ethan called it a responsibility. He'd made exactly one promise at his wife's funeral, that Chloe would never wake up without him there. So he worked night shifts, he slept in 4-hour chunks. He survived on coffee and adrenaline and the kind of exhaustion that became so normal, you forgot what being rested felt like. And he was there every single morning when Chloe opened her eyes. Until tonight, when Victoria Sinclair stood in front of a room full of people and made it very clear that his daughter's life didn't matter as much as hospital metrics. Ethan looked at Chloe sleeping peacefully now, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, and he felt something hard crystallize in his chest. He couldn't lose this job. He needed the health insurance. He needed the steady paycheck. He needed the overnight schedule that let him be present during Chloe's waking hours. But he also wouldn't apologize for choosing his daughter's safety over Victoria Sinclair's ego. So he'd figure it out. He always did. Gates. The next shift came too quickly. Ethan showed up at 10 p.m. the following night, expecting to be called into an office somewhere and handed termination paperwork. Instead, he found his schedule posted normally on the staff board and Marcus barely making eye contact when Ethan asked if there'd been any fallout from leaving early. "Haven't heard anything," Marcus said shortly. Which meant either Victoria hadn't noticed or she was waiting to destroy him publicly at a more strategic moment. Ethan decided he didn't care which one it was. He had patients to take care of. The pediatric ward was chaos within the first hour. A 6-year-old with pneumonia, twins with matching ear infections, a teenager who'd tried to skateboard down a stairwell and discovered gravity still worked. Ethan moved between rooms with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, talking to scared parents in that particular voice. Nurses develop that communicates both competence and compassion without promising miracles. Around midnight, he was in the supply closet restocking his cart when he heard voices in the hallway. "I don't understand why we're doing rounds at this hour," someone said. Female voice. Unfamiliar. "Because I want to see how this facility operates when the executives aren't watching," another voice replied. Ethan recognized that one immediately. Victoria Sinclair. He froze with his hand halfway to a box of sterile gauze. "Most of our critical cases happen overnight," Victoria continued, her heels clicking closer. "If there are systemic problems with care quality or resource allocation, they'll be most visible during these shifts." Ethan heard them pass by the supply closet. He waited 30 seconds, then carefully pushed the door open and looked out. Victoria was walking the corridor with two people he didn't recognize, probably administrators or consultants or whoever billionaires brought along when they wanted to inspect their recent purchases. She was wearing black slacks and a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent. And she moved through the pediatric ward like a general surveying a battlefield. "This is our overnight charge nurse, Marcus Chen," someone was saying, introducing her to Marcus at the central desk. Victoria shook his hand with the same warmth most people reserved for signing tax forms. "Mr. Chen, I'm interested in your staffing ratios. How many nurses are currently on duty?" "6," Marcus said, "for 42 patients." "That's a 7-to-1 ratio." "Yes." "Industry standard is 5-to-1 for pediatric acute care." "We're aware," Marcus said carefully. "We've requested additional funding for staffing increases, but the previous administration ignored the request because they were embezzling from the equipment budget," Victoria finished. "Yes, I'm aware. That's been addressed. You'll have approval for 2 additional positions by the end of the month." Marcus blinked. "Really?" "Yes," Victoria said. "Email me directly if there are bureaucratic delays." She moved on before Marcus could respond. Ethan watched her stop at a patient room, peer through the window at a sleeping child, then consult something on the tablet her assistant was carrying. She asked questions. She took notes. She noticed things, like the crack in one of the ceiling tiles and the way the linoleum near the nurse's station was starting to peel up at the corner, and the fact that 3 of the IV poles had wheels that squeaked loud enough to wake patients. "Document all of this," Victoria told her assistant. "Maintenance should have caught these issues months ago." They were 2 rooms away from Ethan now. He considered ducking back into the supply closet, but before he could move, Victoria's gaze swept down the hallway and landed directly on him. Their eyes met. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. "Mr. Vale?" she said. Ethan straightened. "Miss Sinclair, boss." Victoria walked toward him with that same measured pace that suggested she'd never hurried anywhere in her life. Her assistant and the other administrators followed like ducklings. "You're working tonight, Victoria observed. "Yes," Ethan said, "despite leaving your previous shift 6 hours early. I had a family emergency." "And did that emergency resolve itself?" Victoria asked. Her tone was perfectly neutral, which somehow made it worse. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "It did. Good," Victoria said. Then, without any transition or warning, "Walk me through your current patient assignments." Ethan hesitated. "What?" "Your patients," Victoria repeated. "I want to understand how overnight care works in this department. You're assigned to which rooms?" 4 through 9, Ethan said slowly. "Show me." It wasn't a request. Ethan glanced at Marcus, who just shrugged helplessly, then led Victoria down the hallway to his assigned rooms. She followed silently while he explained each case. The 6-year-old with pneumonia who was responding well to antibiotics. The twins whose fevers had broken an hour ago. The teenager with the skateboard injury who kept trying to leave against medical advice. Victoria listened without interrupting. She looked at charts when he referenced them. She asked occasional questions that suggested she actually understood medical terminology, which surprised him. When they reached his last room, she paused. "Do you enjoy this work?" Victoria asked. The question caught him off guard. "Yes." "Why?" Ethan looked through the window at the teenager sleeping in the bed, his leg elevated and wrapped in a cast covered with signatures from friends who'd visited earlier. "Because kids are resilient," he said. "Adults come in here and they're scared and angry and they want to know why this is happening to them. Kids just want to know if they're going to be okay. And most of the time, you can tell them yes." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "And when you can't? Then you make sure they're not alone," Ethan said. Something crossed Victoria's face then. Something quick and complicated that he couldn't quite read before her professional mask slipped back into place. "You left your shift early last night," Victoria said. "That's unacceptable." "I know." "You were distracted during a mandatory staff meeting. Also unacceptable." "I know. And now you're here, working competently and professionally, as if none of that matters." Ethan met her gaze. "My daughter matters. Everything else I can apologize for." Victoria studied him with those ice blue eyes that probably made corporate executives break down and confess their failures. You have a daughter? Yes. How old? 7. And last night's emergency involved her. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. Yes. Victoria nodded slowly, like she was filing this information away in some mental database. In the future, Mr. Vale, if you have a legitimate emergency requiring you to leave your shift early, you will notify your charge nurse immediately and follow proper protocol. You will not simply walk out of the building without authorization. Is that clear? Yes, Ethan said. Good, Victoria said. Then, you're not fired. She walked away before he could respond. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long moment, watching her disappear around the corner with her entourage, and tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. Shit. The rumors started spreading the next day. Ethan heard them in the break room, in the elevator, in snatches of conversation between nurses who thought he wasn't listening. Apparently, Victoria Sinclair had done a complete overnight inspection of the pediatric ward. Apparently, she'd questioned multiple staff members. Apparently, she'd been specifically interested in Ethan Vale and whether he was a cultural fit for the new hospital direction. She's building a case to fire you, one of the older nurses told him bluntly. That's what they do. Document everything, find a pattern, then present you with termination papers and dare you to challenge it. Maybe, Ethan said, you should start looking for another job. Well, Ethan didn't respond to that because the truth was, he'd already looked. There weren't many hospitals in Chicago that offered the specific combination of overnight pediatric positions with decent benefits and scheduling flexibility that he needed. Riverside had been a miracle find. Leaving wasn't impossible, but it would mean uprooting Chloe's school, changing their entire routine, possibly losing the apartment because he wouldn't be able to maintain the same income level. So he kept working. He showed up on time. He followed every protocol exactly. He double-checked his documentation and triple-checked his med counts and made absolutely sure that Victoria Sinclair would never have a legitimate reason to question his professional competence. 2 weeks passed without incident. Then 3. Ethan started to relax, thinking maybe he'd dodged the bullet after all. That's when Chloe's school called. Mr. Vale. The nurse's voice was professional but concerned. Chloe's not feeling well. She's complaining of chest pain again. Ethan closed his eyes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He found his daughter in the nurse's office, sitting on the examination table and looking miserable. Hey, kiddo, Ethan said gently, sitting down next to her. You okay? It hurts, Chloe said, putting her hand over her chest. Ethan felt that familiar cold weight settle in his stomach. This was the 3rd time in 2 weeks. That wasn't normal. That wasn't nothing. He took her home, made an appointment with their pediatrician, and spent the rest of the afternoon researching pediatric chest pain while Chloe napped on the couch. Most of what he found was reassuring. Growing pains, anxiety, minor muscle strain. But there was other stuff too, buried in the medical literature. Stuff he didn't want to think about. Stuff that required expensive testing and specialists they couldn't afford even with his hospital insurance. Chloe's pediatrician called it probable costochondritis and recommended over-the-counter anti-inflammatories. Ethan nodded and thanked her and didn't mention that his nursing experience told him this didn't quite fit that diagnosis. Because what was he supposed to do? Demand a cardiology referral based on a hunch? Pay thousands of dollars for tests that might reveal nothing? So he watched her carefully. He kept a log of every episode. He adjusted her activities, made sure she wasn't overdoing it at school, and tried not to let her see how worried he was. 3 days later, he was at work when his phone buzzed with a text from Chloe's school again. Before he could read it, Marcus appeared next to him. Victoria wants to see you. Ethan's stomach dropped. Why? Didn't say. But she's in the conference room on 3 and she asked for you specifically. Is she someone, yeah. This was it, Ethan thought. The firing, the documentation, the carefully constructed case about why he wasn't a cultural fit for Victoria Sinclair's vision of a perfect hospital. He took the elevator up to the 3rd floor and found the conference room empty, except for Victoria sitting at the head of the table with a file folder open in front of her. Sit down, Mr. Vale, she said without looking up. Ethan sat. Victoria closed the folder and finally met his gaze. I've been reviewing your employment record. Okay, Ethan said carefully. You've worked here for 3 years. Your performance evaluations are excellent. Your patient satisfaction scores are consistently above department average. You have 0 complaints filed against you. Your colleagues describe you as reliable, competent, and professional. Ethan waited for the other shoe to drop. You also, Victoria continued, have a documented pattern of leaving shifts early, declining overtime opportunities, and refusing management positions despite being qualified for them. I have a daughter, Ethan said. So you've mentioned, Victoria said, multiple times, as if that explains everything. It does explain everything, Ethan said quietly. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him with that same intense focus she'd had during the overnight inspection. Tell me something, Mr. Vale. What makes you think your personal situation entitles you to special treatment? I don't, Ethan said. Then why should I tolerate an employee who consistently prioritizes his personal life over his professional responsibilities? Because I'm good at my job, Ethan said. Because my patients get better. Because when there's a crisis, I handle it. Because despite whatever pattern you think you've found in my file, I show up and I do the work and I do it well. Adequately, Victoria corrected. You do it adequately. Good would be volunteering for extra shifts. Good would be accepting leadership roles. Good would be prioritizing the hospital's needs above your own convenience. Ethan felt anger spark in his chest. My daughter having a medical emergency isn't convenience. And how often does that happen? Victoria asked. Because according to your attendance records, you've left early or called out 18 times in the last 3 years. That's 6 times per year. Once every 2 months. Does your daughter have a chronic medical condition I should be aware of? The question hit like a physical blow. No, Ethan said. It wasn't quite a lie. Chloe didn't have a diagnosis. Just symptoms. Just patterns. Just a father's growing certainty that something was wrong and no money to prove it. Victoria watched him for a long moment. Then I'm putting you on formal notice, she said. Any future absences or early departures without advance approval will result in immediate termination. Is that understood? Yes, Ethan said. You're dismissed. Ethan stood up and walked out before he said something that would get him fired on the spot. He made it to the stairwell before his phone buzzed again. The text from Chloe's school was simple. Please call when you have a moment. Ethan called. Mr. Vale, the nurse said. Chloe had another episode. Of course she did. Is she okay? Ethan asked. She's resting now, but we think you should probably pick her up early today. I'm at work, Ethan said. My shift doesn't end until 6. Oh, the nurse said. Well, she can wait in the office, but she's pretty uncomfortable. Ethan closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against the cold concrete wall of the stairwell. He could stay, follow Victoria's ultimatum, prove he could prioritize the hospital over his personal life. Or he could go get his daughter, who was 7 years old and scared and in pain, and probably lose his job in the process. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Ethan said. He went back to the nurse's station, told Marcus he had another emergency, and walked out before anyone could stop him. This time, he knew he wasn't coming back. Ethan picked up Chloe from school and drove home in silence while she dozed in the passenger seat with her backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. The afternoon traffic crawled through downtown Chicago, giving him plenty of time to calculate exactly how screwed he was. Rent was due in 8 days, the car payment in 12. Chloe's after-school program charged monthly whether she attended or not, and he'd already paid for November. His phone sat in the cup holder between them, screen dark, waiting for the inevitable call from Human Resources. It didn't come that afternoon, or that evening. By the time Ethan fed Chloe dinner, mac and cheese from a box because he was too exhausted to attempt anything more complicated, and got her settled in front of a movie, he'd started wondering if maybe, somehow, he'd gotten lucky. Maybe Marcus hadn't reported it yet. Maybe Victoria was too busy dismantling other people's careers to notice his absence. Maybe he was an idiot for hoping. Chloe fell asleep on the couch around 8, her head tilted at an angle that would definitely give her a sore neck by morning. Ethan carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stood in the doorway watching her breathe for longer than was probably healthy. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a small miracle he couldn't quite trust. His phone buzzed. Ethan looked at the screen and felt his stomach drop through the floor. The email was from Victoria Sinclair directly, not HR. Subject line: Meeting required. He opened it. Mr. Vale, you are required to attend a disciplinary meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. in my office. Failure to attend will be considered voluntary resignation. V. Sinclair Short. Professional. Absolutely terrifying. Ethan read it 3 more times, then set his phone down and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. He'd known this was coming. He'd walked out of the hospital fully aware of the consequences. But seeing it spelled out in corporate language made it real in a way that panic and adrenaline had temporarily allowed him to ignore. He needed this job. Chloe needed his insurance. They needed stability. But Chloe also needed a father who showed up when she was scared and hurting. Ethan had made his choice. Now he'd have to live with it. Sleep didn't come easy that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling and running through conversations in his head, trying to figure out what he could possibly say to Victoria Sinclair that would convince her he deserved another chance. Nothing sounded right. Everything sounded like excuses. By the time his alarm went off at 6 a.m., he'd managed maybe 3 hours of actual rest. Chloe was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her math homework spread out in front of her. She looked better this morning, more color in her cheeks, less of that pinched expression she got when her chest hurt. "Morning, kiddo," Ethan said, starting the coffee maker. "How are you feeling?" "Okay," Chloe said, not looking up from her worksheet. "Is today pancake day?" "Bo si muffin shots. Thursday." "Right. They always did pancakes on Thursday because it was the one morning Ethan wasn't completely destroyed from working overnight." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Chocolate chip or blueberry?" "Chocolate chip," Chloe said immediately, then paused. "Are you okay, Dad?" Ethan forced a smile. "I'm fine. Why?" "You look sad." Kids noticed everything. It was one of those universal truths Ethan had learned the hard way over the past 3 years. You couldn't hide emotions from children because they paid attention to things adults had trained themselves to ignore. "Just tired," Ethan said, which was true enough. "Did you have to work really late?" "Something like that." "No." Chloe accepted this with a shrug and went back to her homework while Ethan made pancakes on autopilot, his brain already skipping ahead to the meeting at 2 p.m. and all the ways it could destroy everything he'd built. He dropped Chloe at school, drove home, tried to sleep, failed, and spent the rest of the morning cleaning the apartment with manic energy because sitting still made the anxiety worse. By 1:30, he'd vacuumed every room, done 2 loads of laundry, and scrubbed the bathroom until the tile gleamed. The hospital was a 20-minute drive. Ethan gave himself 30, parked in the employee garage, and walked through the main entrance with the grim determination of someone heading toward their own execution. Victoria's office was on the 5th floor in the administrative wing, where actual patient care felt like a distant concept. Everything up here was glass and steel and minimalist furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s with perfect makeup and a name tag that said Diane, looked up when Ethan approached. "Ethan Vale," he said. "I have a 2 o'clock meeting." Diane checked her computer, nodded, and gestured toward a row of chairs along the wall. "Miss Sinclair is running a few minutes behind. Please have a seat." Ethan sat. The chairs were just as uncomfortable as they looked. He waited for 15 minutes, watching other staff members come and go, all of them moving with the careful efficiency of people who knew they were being evaluated. A man in a suit rushed past talking urgently into his phone about budget allocations. 2 women in business casual walked by discussing supply chain logistics. Nobody made eye contact. At 2:17, the door to Victoria's office opened and a man in his 50s walked out looking pale and shaken. He moved past Ethan without speaking, his hands clutching a folder against his chest. "Miss Sinclair will see you now," Diane said. Ethan stood up and walked into the office before his brain could fully process the fear response screaming at him to run. Victoria's office was exactly what he'd expected, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago, a desk that could probably double as a landing strip for small aircraft, and absolutely 0 personal touches anywhere. No photos, no plants, no indication that an actual human being spent time in this space. Victoria herself sat behind the desk wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly salary. She didn't look up when he entered. "Close the door," she said. "Sit down." Ethan did both. Victoria finished whatever she was reading on her tablet, set it aside with deliberate precision, and finally met his gaze. "Do you know why you're here?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Tell me." I left work yesterday without authorization. For the 18th time in 3 years, Victoria said. But this time, you did it less than 10 minutes after I explicitly warned you that any future violations would result in immediate termination. I know. And yet you walked out anyway. Yes. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him with that same calculating expression she'd worn during their first confrontation. I'm trying to understand your thought process, Mr. Vale. Either you're incredibly stupid or you simply don't care about keeping this job. I care, Ethan said quietly, but I also have a daughter who needed me. Everyone has obligations outside of work, Victoria said. That's not unique to you. What makes you think your situation is special, Bum? Ethan felt something crack in his chest. My daughter is 7 years old. She's been having chest pain for 2 weeks. The school nurse called because she was sitting in the office crying and scared, and they wanted someone to pick her up. So yes, I left, because she needed her father more than this hospital needed one nurse during a slow afternoon shift. And what about the next time? Victoria asked. And the time after that? What happens when I build a staffing schedule around you and you simply decide not to show up because your daughter has a stomach ache or a bad dream or she's having heart problems? Ethan interrupted. The words came out louder than he'd intended, harsher. Victoria's expression shifted slightly, not quite surprised, but something close to it. What? She said. Heart problems, Ethan repeated, and now that he'd started, he couldn't seem to stop. Or something. I don't know for sure because I can't afford the testing to find out. Her pediatrician says it's probably nothing serious, probably just inflammation or growing pains or anxiety, but I'm a nurse, and I know what cardiac symptoms look like in children, and this doesn't feel right. But I also can't pay for a cardiology consult without insurance approval, and insurance won't approve it without documented evidence, and documented evidence requires tests we can't afford. So I watch her. I keep a log. I monitor her symptoms and try to make sure she doesn't overdo it, and when the school calls because she's in pain, I go get her, because that's what parents do. Silence filled the office like a living thing. Victoria's face had gone completely blank. Not cold, blank. Like she was a computer that had just received input it didn't know how to process. Your daughter has a heart condition, she finally said. I don't know, Ethan admitted. Maybe. Probably not, but I can't prove it either way. And your insurance won't cover diagnostic testing, not without pre-authorization from a specialist, which requires a referral from her pediatrician, who doesn't think it's serious enough to warrant emergency intervention. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you mention this before? Because it sounds like an excuse, Ethan said. Because everyone has problems and everyone thinks theirs are the most important. Because I didn't want to be that employee who uses his kid as emotional manipulation to avoid consequences. Because, he stopped, swallowed hard. Because saying it out loud makes it real. And if it's real, then I have to deal with the fact that something might be seriously wrong with my daughter, and I can't afford to fix it. The silence stretched out again. Victoria stood up suddenly, walked to the window, and stared out at the city below. Ethan stayed in his chair and tried to remember how to breathe normally. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, Victoria said abruptly, her back still to him. Do you know what that's like? No, Ethan said. It's a Rust Belt city that died 30 years ago, and nobody bothered to tell the people still living there. My father worked in a steel mill until it closed. Then he worked whatever jobs he could find, construction, warehouse, cleaning offices at night. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families in the suburbs. She paused. When I was 12, my father had a heart attack. Massive coronary event, should have been survivable with proper medical intervention. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He died in the ambulance, Victoria continued, her voice flat and factual. Because the nearest hospital wouldn't admit him without proof of insurance. They turned the ambulance away. Sent him to County General 45 minutes away instead. He died before they got there. I'm sorry, Ethan said quietly. Don't be, Victoria said. It was 20 years ago. She turned around finally, and her face was still that perfect professional mask. But it taught me something important. The world doesn't care about your story. It doesn't care if you're a good person, or if you have obligations, or if you're doing your best. It cares about results, performance, value. The only way to survive is to be so competent, so essential, that they can't afford to throw you away. Ethan understood suddenly why Victoria Sinclair was the way she was. Not cold, armored, not cruel, terrified of weakness because weakness had killed her father and probably almost killed her. That's why you bought at the hospital, Ethan said. I bought the hospital because it was a failing institution with good bones and significant growth potential, Victoria corrected. The fact that I also have personal reasons for caring about healthcare access is irrelevant. Is it? Oh, Victoria's jaw tightened. You left work yesterday without authorization. You violated a direct order. You demonstrated that you're unwilling or unable to prioritize your professional responsibilities. In any functional organization, that would result in immediate termination. I know, Ethan said. However, Victoria continued, I'm not going to fire you. Ethan blinked. What? You're not fired, Victoria repeated. But there are conditions. She walked back to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a document. You're going to sign a formal disciplinary agreement. It states that any future unauthorized absences will result in immediate termination without appeal. It also places you on a performance improvement plan for the next 90 days. You'll meet with your supervisor weekly to review your attendance and patient care metrics. And, she paused, you're going to bring me your daughter's medical records. Why? Because I'm going to arrange for a cardiology consult, Victoria said. Properly documented, fully covered through our employee family medical program. No cost to you. If there's something wrong, we'll find it. If there isn't, you'll have peace of mind and your daughter will have documentation that satisfies the insurance company's requirements for any future care. Ethan stared at her. I don't understand. Which part? Any of this. You've spent the last month making it very clear that you think I'm a liability. Now you're offering to help me? I'm offering to solve a problem, Victoria corrected. You're distracted at work because you're worried about your daughter's health. If we address that concern through legitimate medical channels, you can focus on your job. That benefits everyone. It was such a perfectly logical, emotionally sterile explanation that Ethan almost believed it. What's the real reason? He asked. Victoria's expression didn't change. That is the real reason. No, Ethan said quietly. The real reason is that you saw yourself in that story. The father who couldn't afford care. The system that failed him. You're trying to fix something that happened 20 years ago. Sign the agreement, Mr. Vale, Victoria said, pushing the document across the desk. Ethan picked it up and read through it carefully. It was exactly what she'd described. Strict attendance requirements, weekly check-ins, zero-tolerance policy. But it also included a clause about the medical benefits, spelled out in clear language that would hold up if anyone tried to challenge it later. He signed it. Good, Victoria said, taking the document back. You're dismissed. And Mr. Vale? She looked up at him. Don't make me regret this. I won't, Ethan promised. He left the office feeling like he'd just survived something he didn't fully understand. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange liminal space where Ethan couldn't quite figure out what was happening. Victoria arranged the cardiology appointment within 48 hours, something that normally would have taken weeks of referrals and insurance approvals. The cardiologist was based at the hospital, a specialist named Dr. Patel, who had a reputation for being thorough and patient with scared kids. Chloe charmed him immediately by asking if hearts really looked like the emoji on her iPad. Close, Dr. Patel said, setting up the ultrasound equipment. But the real version is a little more complicated. The testing took 2 hours. Ethan sat in the corner of the examination room and watched Dr. Patel work through what felt like every possible cardiac assessment. Ultrasound, EKG, stress test modified for a 7-year-old's activity level, blood work. Chloe handled it like a trooper, only complaining once when the blood draw pinched. You're very brave, Doctor, Patel told her afterward. My dad says brave just means scared, but doing it anyway, Chloe said. Dr. Patel glanced at Ethan. Your dad sounds like a smart man. The results came back 3 days later. Ethan was at work when Dr. Patel called. He stepped into the supply closet for privacy, his heart hammering against his ribs. Good news, Dr. Patel said immediately. Chloe's heart is structurally normal. All the tests came back within expected ranges for her age and development. Ethan leaned against the wall and felt relief wash through him so intensely it was almost painful. So the chest pain, Is most likely costochondritis, exactly like her pediatrician suspected, Dr. Patel said. Inflammation of the cartilage connecting the ribs to the sternum. Very common in children, especially during growth spurts. Painful, but not dangerous. That's it? Ethan said. That's really it? That's it, Dr. Patel confirmed. I'm sending you home with documentation and treatment recommendations. Over-the-counter anti-inflammatories, warm compresses. Avoiding activities that aggravate the symptoms. Should resolve on its own within a few months. Ethan closed his eyes. Thank you. Thank whoever arranged for this consult to be expedited, Doctor, Patel said. Usually it takes weeks to get kids in for non-emergency cardiac assessments. Someone must have pulled some serious strings. Yeah, Ethan thought. Someone definitely had. He wanted to feel grateful. He did feel grateful, but he also felt something more complicated, like he'd accepted a debt he didn't know how to repay. The rumors about Ethan started spreading through the hospital around the same time the test results came back. He first heard about it from Marcus, who pulled him aside during a shift change. People are talking, Marcus said quietly. About what? About you. About Victoria Sinclair personally intervening on your behalf. About special treatment and favoritism, and why a single father with an attendance problem suddenly gets medical benefits that nobody else receives. Ethan felt his chest tighten. It's not favoritism. It's employee family medical coverage. It's available to everyone. Mam soy says. Except nobody else gets their appointment scheduled within 48 hours, Marcus pointed out. Nobody else gets a direct referral from the CEO's office. You see how that looks, right? No, Ethan said. How does it look? Marcus hesitated. Like maybe you're getting special treatment, and people are wondering why. The implication hit Ethan like cold water. Are you serious right now? I'm just telling you what people are saying. People can mind their own business, Ethan said sharply. But the rumors didn't stop. They got worse. Within a week, Ethan heard 3 separate versions of a story that suggested he'd somehow manipulated Victoria into helping him. One version involved him threatening to sue the hospital. Another suggested he had connections to the board of directors. The most creative one implied he was secretly dating Victoria, which would have been laughable if it wasn't so insulting to both of them. Ethan tried to ignore it. He showed up for his shifts, did his work, kept his head down. But it was hard to ignore whispered conversations that stopped when he walked into a room, or the way some of his colleagues suddenly found reasons to avoid working directly with him. The worst part was knowing there was nothing he could do to fix it. Defending himself would just feed the rumors. Confronting people would make him look defensive. The only option was to endure it and hope eventually people would find something else to talk about. Then Victoria announced she was restructuring the entire hospital administration. The email went out on a Monday morning to all staff. Effective immediately, 5 senior executives were being let go. 3 department heads were being reassigned. An external consulting firm would be conducting interviews with all remaining administrative staff to assess cultural fit and operational efficiency. The hospital descended into chaos. Ethan watched it happen from the relative safety of the pediatric ward, where patient care continued regardless of whatever corporate drama was unfolding upstairs. But even there, the tension was palpable. Nurses worried about their jobs. Doctors complained about disrupted workflows. Everyone walked around looking over their shoulders, wondering who would be fired next. She's insane, one of the senior nurses said during a break room conversation. You don't just fire half your leadership team without a transition plan. She has a plan, someone else argued. She's been documenting problems for weeks. This isn't impulsive. It's still insane. Ethan stayed quiet during these conversations. He'd learned the hard way that having opinions about Victoria Sinclair only made people look at you funny and wonder what you knew that they didn't. The consulting firm showed up that Wednesday, a team of 3 people in matching suits who set up in conference rooms and started pulling staff members for one-on-one interviews. The stated purpose was to understand current operational challenges and identify opportunities for improvement. The actual purpose, everyone knew, was to figure out who else Victoria wanted to fire. Ethan got called in on Thursday afternoon. The interviewer was a woman in her 40s with glasses and a tablet. She smiled professionally and gestured for him to sit. This is informal, she said. Just a conversation about your experience working here and any concerns you might have about hospital operations. Okay, Ethan said carefully. How long have you been at Riverside? 3 years. And you work in pediatrics, night shift? Yes. She asked more questions about staffing levels, supply chain issues, communication between departments, relationships with administrators. Ethan answered honestly but carefully, avoiding anything that could be construed as criticism of specific people. Then she asked, "What's your impression of the new leadership under Ms. Sinclair?" Ethan hesitated. "I think she cares about making the hospital better." "That's diplomatic," the woman said. "What do you really think?" "Us. I think she's demanding and exacting, and she doesn't tolerate excuses or half measures. But I also think she's trying to fix problems that have existed here for years." "Have you had personal interactions with Ms. Sinclair?" "A few." "Positive or negative?" Ethan thought about the confrontation during the staff meeting, the disciplinary meeting in her office, the medical appointment that appeared out of nowhere. "Complicated," he said finally. The interviewer made a note on her tablet. "Thank you, Mr. Vale. That's all I needed." Ethan left feeling like he'd just navigated a minefield blindfolded. The restructuring continued for another 2 weeks. More people were fired. New policies were implemented. Victoria seemed to be everywhere at once, in meetings, on the floors, reviewing documentation, questioning procedures. She was like a force of nature that nobody knew how to predict or control. And through it all, Ethan kept working. He showed up for his shifts. He took care of his patients. He attended his weekly check-ins with his supervisor and demonstrated perfect attendance. He followed every rule, met every metric, and gave Victoria Sinclair absolutely zero reasons to regret not firing him. But he also noticed something strange. Victoria had started appearing in the pediatric ward more often, not for official inspections or administrative business, just showing up, walking through, observing. Sometimes she'd stop and talk to patients' families, asking about their experience and taking notes. Sometimes she'd watch the nurses work from a distance, her expression unreadable. And sometimes Ethan would look up from a patient's chart and find her watching him specifically. It was unnerving. One night around 2 a.m., Ethan was in a patient room helping a terrified 10-year-old with asthma through a breathing treatment when he sensed someone standing in the doorway. He glanced over his shoulder and found Victoria there, silent and observing. She didn't interrupt. She just watched. Ethan finished the treatment, got the kid calmed down and settled back in bed, then stepped out into the hallway where Victoria was waiting. "Can I help you with something?" he asked quietly. "I'm observing overnight operations," Victoria said, "at 2 a.m. "Yes. You do realize that's unusual, right? Most hospital CEOs don't personally observe night shifts." I'm not most hospital CEOs," Victoria said. "Then, how's your daughter?" The question caught him off guard. "She's fine. The treatment plan is working." "Good." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Yes." "Why did you really help me? And don't say it was about operational efficiency or solving problems. I want the real answer." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on something down the hallway. "Because I couldn't save my father," she finally said. "But I could help your daughter. And maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm trying to retroactively fix something that can't be fixed. But it was within my power to help, so I did." "That's not selfish," Ethan said quietly. "That's not selfish, isn't it?" Victoria looked at him. "I used hospital resources for personal reasons. I expedited care that other employees don't receive. I demonstrated favoritism based on emotional reasoning rather than merit." "You demonstrated compassion," Ethan corrected. "There's a difference. In business, there isn't." "This isn't just business," Ethan said. "This is a hospital. People come here because they're sick or scared or hurt. And yeah, operational efficiency matters and financial sustainability matters. But if you strip away all the humanity in pursuit of perfect metrics, you're not running a hospital anymore. You're just running a very expensive machine." Victoria's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been surprise or might have been respect. "That's an interesting perspective." "It's the truth," Ethan said. A call light went off down the hall. Ethan excused himself and went to handle it, leaving Victoria standing alone in the corridor. When he came back 15 minutes later, she was gone. But something had shifted between them that night. Some invisible line had been crossed that neither of them fully understood yet. The restructuring eventually stabilized. The consulting firm finished their interviews and delivered recommendations that Victoria implemented with surgical precision. Some people were fired. Others were reassigned. A few were promoted. The hospital settled into a new rhythm that felt more organized, but also more intense, like everyone was operating at a higher baseline of stress and performance expectation. Ethan survived his 90-day performance improvement plan without incident. His supervisor signed off on his paperwork with a note that described him as reliable and professional. The formal disciplinary agreement was filed away. Life went back to something resembling normal, except for the fact that Victoria Sinclair kept appearing in the pediatric ward at odd hours, and Ethan kept noticing. It happened on a Tuesday in early December when the weather forecast promised snow, and the emergency department was already bracing for the inevitable chaos that came with Chicago winter storms. Ethan arrived for his shift at 9:30 p.m. to find the hospital humming with that particular frequency of controlled panic that meant something big was coming. "Blizzard warning through tomorrow morning," Marcus said by way of greeting. "They're expecting 8 to 12 inches. Wow. Great," Ethan muttered, pulling on his scrubs in the locker room. His phone buzzed with a text from Chloe's babysitter confirming she could stay overnight if needed. Sarah had started doing that after the third time Ethan got stuck at the hospital during a weather emergency. The pediatric ward was already at 90% capacity when he started his rounds. 2 kids with flu, 1 with a broken arm from ice skating, 3 post-surgical patients recovering from scheduled procedures, a teenager with complications from diabetes. Everyone stable but requiring constant monitoring. By midnight, the snow had started falling in thick white curtains that erased the city lights outside the windows. Ethan checked his patients methodically, adjusting IVs and checking vitals while the storm built itself into something serious outside. At 1:15 a.m., the power flickered, just once, just enough to make everyone look up at the ceiling and hold their breath. The lights stayed on. The equipment kept humming. Ethan exchanged glances with another nurse across the ward, both of them thinking the same thing. Backup generators were supposed to kick in seamlessly if main power failed. That flicker meant something wasn't working right. At 1:43 a.m., the power went out completely. Emergency lighting came on immediately, dim red fixtures that cast everything in an eerie glow. But the main overhead lights were gone. And more importantly, about 30 seconds later, the medical equipment started alarming. IV pumps, monitors, ventilators, all of them switching to battery backup and announcing it loudly. "Everyone stay calm." Marcus's voice cut through the sudden noise. "We've got backup power. This is just temporary." Except the backup power didn't come on. 30 seconds became a minute. A minute became 2. The battery alarms kept shrieking. Parents started appearing in doorways asking what was happening. Kids started crying. Ethan was in the middle of manually checking vital signs on his 10-year-old asthma patient when the overhead speaker crackled to life. "Attention all staff. We are experiencing a facility-wide power failure. Backup generators have failed to engage. Maintenance is working to resolve the issue. Please initiate emergency protocols for your departments immediately." The professional calm in that announcement didn't quite hide the underlying "oh shit, we're in trouble" tone. Marcus appeared in the doorway of Ethan's patient room. "Get everyone on manual monitoring. I need a count of which patients are on critical equipment." "Yes, please." 5 on continuous monitoring, Ethan said. 2 on IV medications that can't be interrupted. The post-surgical kids in 204 and 206, can we sustain them on battery backup? "For maybe 2 hours if we're lucky," Ethan said. "Less if the batteries aren't fully charged." Marcus swore quietly and moved on to coordinate with other nurses. Ethan spent the next 20 minutes moving between rooms, reassuring terrified parents, manually documenting vital signs, and doing the mental math on how long each piece of equipment could run on battery power before they had a real crisis. The teenager with diabetes, Emma, 16 years old and sharp enough to recognize when adults were lying about how bad things were, asked him directly, "Are we going to be okay?" "Yes," Ethan said, checking her blood sugar levels manually with a fingerstick test. "But it might be uncomfortable for a while." "That's not the same as safe," Emma said. "You're right," Ethan admitted. "But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. That's a promise." Emma studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." At 2:30 a.m., hospital administration made an announcement that the backup generators had catastrophic mechanical failure and couldn't be repaired quickly. They were bringing in portable generators, but it would take time. All non-critical patients were being discharged or transferred to other facilities. Critical patients would remain on battery backup until portable power could be established. At 2:45 a.m., the elevator system failed completely, trapping 3 people between floors. At 3:10 a.m., the first battery alarm started indicating critical low power. That's when Ethan realized they weren't going to wait for administration to solve this. They needed to act now. He found Marcus in the medication room counting supplies. "We need to move the critical patients downstairs to the ER," Ethan said. "They've got portable generators there for trauma situations." "The elevators are down," Marcus said. "How exactly do you propose moving post-surgical pediatric patients down 5 flights of stairs in the dark?" "Carefully," Ethan said. "But we don't have another option. Those batteries are dying, Marcus. We've got maybe 90 minutes before we start losing monitoring on kids who need it." Marcus pressed his hands against his face. "If we move them wrong, if someone falls, if a kid gets injured during transport, if we don't move them, they're going to code in their rooms with no equipment to save them," Ethan interrupted. "I'll take responsibility, but we have to move now." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Okay," Marcus said finally. "Okay. Get everyone you can and start prepping patients for transport. I'll notify the ER that we're coming." Ethan gathered every available nurse on the floor, 6 people total, which wasn't nearly enough but would have to be. He explained the plan quickly. They'd move in teams, taking the most critical patients first, using stairwells with emergency lighting. Each transport team would consist of 2 adults minimum, with 1 person carrying the child and another managing any portable equipment. "This is insane," one of the younger nurses said. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, "but we're doing it anyway." They started with the post-surgical patients because they were most fragile. Ethan took the first one, a 6-year-old boy recovering from an appendectomy who weighed maybe 50 pounds. He wrapped the kid in blankets, disconnected him from the wall monitors, and lifted him carefully while another nurse grabbed the portable vital signs kit. The stairwell was lit only by dim emergency fixtures and filled with other staff members trying to navigate in the dark. Ethan moved carefully, one step at a time, acutely aware that one slip could turn this rescue into a tragedy. The boy started crying halfway down. "I'm scared." "Me too, buddy," Ethan admitted. "But we're almost there, man." It took 15 minutes to get one patient down 5 flights of stairs and settled in the ER. Then Ethan went back up and did it again. And again. His legs burned, his arms shook, his back screamed in protest. He didn't care. On his 3rd trip up, he encountered Victoria Sinclair in the stairwell. She was climbing up while he was heading down, and they nearly collided on the landing between floors. Victoria looked completely different than he'd ever seen her. Her suit jacket was gone, her white blouse had come untucked, and there was actual fear visible in her expression. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Moving patients to the ER," Ethan said. "The batteries are dying upstairs." "Okay, I know," Victoria said. "I've been coordinating with maintenance. The portable generators should be here within the hour." "We don't have an hour," Ethan said flatly. "I've got 5 more critical patients upstairs who need equipment to stay stable. We're moving them now." Victoria looked past him down the stairwell, then back up toward the pediatric floor. "How many staff do you have?" 6 nurses total. "That's not enough." "It's what I've got," Ethan said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll help," Victoria said. Ethan stared at her. "What?" "I'll help," Victoria repeated. "Tell me what to do." For a moment, Ethan genuinely couldn't process what she was saying. Victoria Sinclair, billionaire CEO, woman who wore $5,000 suits and fired executives before breakfast, was volunteering to carry sick children down dark stairwells during a crisis. "Do you have any medical training?" Ethan asked. "No." "Can you lift 30 pounds safely?" "Yes, Then come on," Ethan said. They climbed back to the 5th floor together. The pediatric ward looked like something from a disaster movie, emergency lighting casting red shadows, equipment alarms creating a constant wall of noise, parents clustered in doorways looking terrified, nurses moving between rooms trying to manually monitor everyone at once. Ethan grabbed Victoria by the arm and pulled her toward one of the patient rooms. "This is Maya. She's 8. Post-surgical day 2 from a cardiac repair. She needs to go down next." Maya's mother looked between Ethan and Victoria with wide eyes. What's happening? We're moving everyone downstairs where we have reliable power, Ethan explained. Miss Sinclair is going to help carry Maya. I'll be right beside you the whole time managing her equipment. It's going to be slow and careful and safe. Okay, Maya's mother whispered. Ethan showed Victoria how to lift the child properly, supporting her head and keeping her surgical site protected. Victoria followed his instructions exactly, her face set in concentration. They moved toward the stairwell with Maya's mother right behind them, and Ethan managing the portable monitor that was tracking the kid's heart rate and oxygen levels. The descent was excruciating. Every step felt like a potential disaster. Maya whimpered occasionally. Her mother was crying silently. Victoria's breathing was controlled but strained from the physical effort. They made it to the ER without incident. Then they went back up and did it again and again. By 4 a.m., Ethan had lost count of how many trips he'd made. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. His hands were shaking from exhaustion. But they'd moved 12 patients safely to the ER, and nobody had gotten hurt. Victoria had stayed the entire time, carrying children downstairs without complaint, taking direction from nurses without argument, doing whatever was needed without hesitation. Her expensive blouse was wrinkled and stained. Her hair had come loose from whatever professional style she usually maintained. She looked completely human for the first time since Ethan had met her. On what turned out to be their last trip up together, Ethan found her sitting on the stairs between the third and fourth floor, her head in her hands. "You okay?" he asked. Victoria looked up. Her face was pale and drawn, and there were tears in her eyes. "I couldn't do this for my father," she said quietly, "when he was dying. When the ambulance was turned away, I was 12 years old and completely helpless. I couldn't fix anything, couldn't help him, couldn't even hold his hand because they wouldn't let me in the ambulance." Ethan sat down next to her on the cold concrete stairs. "But tonight," Victoria continued, her voice shaking slightly, "tonight I could actually do something. Carry these kids to safety. Make sure they don't die because the system failed them. And it's selfish and it doesn't fix what happened 20 years ago, but it's not selfish," Ethan interrupted gently. "It's human. You're allowed to want to help people for personal reasons. That doesn't make it less valuable." Victoria wiped her eyes roughly, like she was angry at herself for showing emotion. "I've spent 15 years building walls between myself and any situation that might make me feel this way. How's that working out for you?" Ethan asked. A sound came out of her that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Terribly, apparently. They sat there together for another minute, just breathing, while the emergency lighting painted everything red and the distant sound of alarms echoed from somewhere above them. "We should finish," Victoria said finally. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. They climbed the last 2 flights together and found that the remaining patients were stable enough to wait for the portable generators, which finally arrived at 4:30 a.m. and were online by 5:15. The crisis slowly de-escalated. Normal operations resumed in chaotic stages. Parents were updated. Kids were settled. The sun started rising over a snow-covered city that had survived another disaster. Ethan was finishing documentation at the nurses' station when Victoria appeared next to him. She'd found her jacket somewhere and attempted to fix her hair, but she still looked like she'd been through a war. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not waiting for permission," Victoria said. "For seeing the problem and solving it immediately. For—" she paused. "For showing me what leadership actually looks like." Ethan set down his pen. "You helped save 12 kids tonight. That's leadership." "I followed your instructions," Victoria corrected. "You made the decisions." "Because you trusted me to make them," Ethan said. "That's what good leaders do. They trust the people who know what they're doing." Victoria smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Ethan had ever seen from her. It transformed her entire face. "Is this the part where you tell me I'm not as terrible as everyone thinks?" "No," Ethan said. "This is the part where I tell you that you're capable of being better than you've been allowing yourself to be." The smile faded slightly, replaced by something more vulnerable. "What if I don't know how?" "Then you learn," Ethan said simply. "Same way everyone else does, by trying and failing and trying again." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I fired 43 people in my first 2 months here. I know. Some of them probably deserved it. Some of them definitely didn't. I just kept seeing inefficiency and waste, and people who weren't trying hard enough, And I thought if I could just eliminate all the weakness. She stopped. But you can't eliminate weakness. It's part of being human. Yeah, Ethan said. It is. They stood there together while the hospital slowly returned to normal around them. The overhead lights came back on gradually as maintenance restored power section by section. The red emergency lighting faded. The sun kept rising. I should go home, Ethan said finally. My shift ended 2 hours ago, and my daughter's probably wondering where I am. How is she? Victoria asked. Chloe, how's her treatment going? Ethan felt something warm spread through his chest at the fact that Victoria remembered his daughter's name. She's good. The costochondritis is responding to the anti-inflammatories. She's back to being a normal 7-year-old who thinks homework is torture and vegetables are evil. That's good, Victoria said. Then, would you... She hesitated. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? Not hospital business, just to talk. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You want to have coffee with me? I want to understand how you do this, Victoria said. How you balance everything. How you stay kind when the world gives you every reason not to be. How you... She stopped again, searching for words. How you remain human in a job that asks you to be mechanical. Coffee sounds good, Ethan said. They exchanged numbers. Victoria left first, walking toward the administrative offices with her shoulders squared and her professional mask sliding back into place. Ethan watched her go and thought about how strange it was that a crisis in the middle of a winter storm had somehow created the first real connection between them. He drove home through snow-covered streets as the city woke up around him. Chloe was already at the kitchen table eating cereal when he walked in, still in his scrubs that smelled like hospital disinfectant and exhaustion. Dad! She jumped up and hugged him around the waist. Sarah said you got stuck at work because of the snow. Yeah, Ethan said, hugging her back. Big storm. Everything's okay now, though. Were people scared? Ethan thought about 12 kids being carried down dark stairwells, about parents crying, about Victoria Sinclair's hands shaking as she lifted a post-surgical patient. Yeah, he said honestly, but we took care of them. Because that's what you do, Chloe said confidently. You help people. That's what everyone did last night, Ethan corrected. Lots of people helping. He made Chloe pancakes even though he was running on approximately 90 minutes of sleep in the last 36 hours. They ate breakfast together, and she told him about school and her friends and a project she was working on about space. Normal things. Beautiful, mundane, everyday things that felt precious after a night of crisis. After Chloe left for school, Ethan collapsed on the couch and slept for 6 hours straight. When he woke up, there were 2 text messages waiting on his phone. The first was from Marcus. Hospital board is calling what you did last night heroic. Meanwhile, I'm writing incident reports about unauthorized patient transport. Bureaucracy is fun. The second was from an unknown number that could only be Victoria. I meant what I said about coffee. Let me know when you're free. Ethan stared at that second message for a long time. 3 months ago, Victoria Sinclair had been the terrifying new CEO who threatened to fire him for checking his phone. Now she was someone who'd carried sick children down dark stairs and cried about her father and asked how to stay human in a world that rewarded cold efficiency. People could change. Ethan had always believed that in theory, but watching it happen was something else entirely. He texted back, Friday afternoon, there's a place near the hospital. The response came within 2 minutes. Send me the address. The coffee shop was a small independent place 2 blocks from Riverside that Ethan usually stopped at on his way to night shifts. It had mismatched furniture, aggressive hipster energy, and coffee that was genuinely good instead of Instagram-worthy. He arrived at 3 p.m. on Friday to find Victoria already there, sitting in a corner booth wearing jeans and a sweater that looked almost casual. This is strange, were the first words out of her mouth when he sat down. What is? This? Victoria gestured between them. Having a voluntary social interaction with an employee. I don't do this. So why are you doing it now? Ethan asked. Victoria was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in slow circles on the table. Because the night of the blackout, I watched you make life and death decisions while everyone else was panicking. And the way you did it, it wasn't cruel or cold or calculated. You just saw what needed to happen and you made it happen, and you never questioned whether it was your place to take charge. Someone had to, Ethan said simply. That's exactly my point, Victoria said. Most people wait for permission, wait for someone else to solve the problem, wait for the perfect moment that never comes. You just acted. And I realized I've been running this hospital like a corporation, when what it actually needs is people who give a damn and aren't afraid to show it. Their coffee arrived, plain black for Ethan, something complicated with oat milk for Victoria. They both took careful sips before continuing. So I've been thinking, Victoria said, about systemic changes, not just firing people who aren't performing, but actually addressing why they can't perform. Staffing ratios, equipment budgets, family leave policies, the kind of structural support that makes it possible for people like you to do this work without destroying themselves in the process. That sounds expensive, Ethan said. It is expensive, Victoria agreed. But running a hospital that hemorrhages good staff because we burn them out is more expensive in the long run. And she paused. It's the right thing to do, which is not a phrase I've used often in business contexts. Ethan studied her across the table. What changed? I mean, really? Because 3 months ago you were a completely different person. Victoria set down her coffee cup. I watched my father die because a hospital turned him away. I spent 20 years building an empire so that I'd never be that powerless again. But somewhere along the way, I became the kind of person who would have turned him away. I became so obsessed with efficiency and performance that I forgot the entire point was supposed to be helping people. And now I'm trying to figure out how to be better, Victoria said, which is terrifying because I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm good at business. I'm good at numbers and strategy and making difficult decisions, but the human part, actually caring about people, understanding what they need, building trust instead of fear, I don't know how to do that. Most people don't, Ethan said. They just fake it until it becomes real. Victoria smiled slightly. Is that what you do? What? Sometimes, Ethan admitted. You think I knew how to be a single father raising a kid by myself? I had no idea. Still don't most days. But Chloe needs me to be competent and stable, so I pretend I am until I figure it out for real. Fake it until you make it, Victoria said. Exactly. They talked for 2 hours. About the hospital, about their families, about Chicago winters and bad coffee, and the particular exhaustion that came from caring too much about work that never stopped needing you. It was strange and comfortable in equal measure, like they were both feeling out the boundaries of whatever this was becoming. When they finally left, walking out into the cold December afternoon, Victoria paused on the sidewalk. Can we do this again? Coffee, Ethan asked. Talking, Victoria clarified. Having conversations where I'm not the CEO and you're not the employee and we're just two people trying to figure things out. Yeah, Ethan said. I'd like that. He drove home feeling like the universe had shifted slightly off its axis in a way he couldn't quite explain. The changes at the hospital started small but accumulated quickly. Within 2 weeks, Victoria had approved funding for 3 additional nursing positions in pediatrics. Within a month, she'd implemented a new family emergency leave policy that gave staff more flexibility without penalizing them professionally. She started holding quarterly town halls where anyone could raise concerns directly to leadership without fear of retaliation. Not everyone trusted it at first. Years of corporate efficiency culture had made people wary of anything that sounded too good to be true. But gradually, carefully, the culture started to shift. Ethan watched it happen from his position on the night shift, where change always arrived slowly and was usually greeted with suspicion. But his colleagues noticed when staffing ratios improved. They noticed when equipment requisitions got approved faster. They noticed when Victoria herself started appearing in departments to ask what people needed instead of what they'd done wrong. She's different, one of the older nurses said during a break room conversation. I don't know what happened, but she's actually listening now. Ethan kept his mouth shut about coffee conversations and winter blackouts, and the particular way people changed when they stopped being afraid of their own humanity. He and Victoria kept meeting for coffee every Friday when their schedules aligned. Sometimes they talked about work. Sometimes they talked about nothing important, movies and books and whether Chicago pizza was actually superior to New York style. It was easy in a way that Ethan hadn't expected. Victoria was sharp and funny when she let her guard down, and she asked questions like she genuinely wanted to understand rather than just waiting for her turn to talk. Chloe asked about you. Ethan mentioned one Friday in January. Victoria looked surprised. She did? She saw your picture in the hospital newsletter, Ethan explained. Something about the new pediatric equipment grant. She wanted to know if you were the lady who helped kids at the hospital. What did you tell her? I told her yes, Ethan said, and that you were working hard to make things better for everyone. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Would it be weird if I met her? Met Chloe? Yes, Victoria said. I mean, if that's inappropriate or crosses some boundary, I understand. But I'd like to meet the kid whose medical emergency accidentally taught me I was becoming a terrible person. Ethan laughed. That's a hell of a legacy for a 7-year-old. Is that a no? It's a yes, Ethan said. But fair warning, she's going to ask you a million questions. She's in that phase where she interrogates every adult she meets about their job and their house and whether they have pets. I can handle interrogation, Victoria said. I went to Harvard Business School. They arranged it for the following Saturday. Victoria showed up at Ethan's apartment at noon wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger and less intimidating. Chloe opened the door and stared at her with wide eyes. Hi, Victoria said, suddenly looking uncertain. I'm Victoria. You're really tall, Chloe observed. Chloe, Ethan said warningly. What? She is. Victoria laughed, genuinely laughed, and crouched down to Chloe's level. You're absolutely right. I am really tall. It makes buying pants very annoying. Chloe giggled. Do you work at Dad's hospital? I do, Victoria said. I help make sure the hospital has everything it needs to take care of kids like you. Dad says you're important. Your dad is very kind, Victoria said. But really, everyone at the hospital is important. Your dad especially. Us. They spent the afternoon together. Victoria, Ethan, and Chloe. They went to the park even though it was freezing, and Chloe showed Victoria how high she could swing and demonstrated her expert snow angel technique. Victoria was awkward with kids in the way that adults who don't interact with children regularly always are, but she tried. She asked questions and listened to Chloe's rambling stories and didn't check her phone once. Later, while Chloe was playing on the jungle gym, Victoria and Ethan stood together near the swings. She's wonderful, Victoria said quietly. Yeah, Ethan agreed. She's the best thing I've ever done. You're a good father, Victoria, Victoria said. I hope you know that. Ethan felt something warm and complicated spread through his chest. I'm trying. That's all anyone can do, Victoria said. They watched Chloe climb and jump and play with the fearless confidence of kids who haven't learned yet that the world can hurt them. And standing there in the cold January afternoon, Ethan realized that something had fundamentally shifted between him and Victoria Sinclair. They'd started as antagonists, moved to wary colleagues, and had somehow arrived at something that felt like friendship. Or maybe something more complicated than friendship. He wasn't ready to examine that thought too closely yet, but it was there, hovering at the edges of his awareness, impossible to completely ignore. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and slightly surreal. Victoria started joining Ethan and Chloe for weekend activities with increasing regularity. The aquarium one Saturday, a children's museum the next, a movie that Chloe picked and they all pretended to enjoy, despite it being objectively terrible. Each time, Victoria showed up looking less like a billionaire CEO and more like someone who was learning how to exist outside of boardrooms and quarterly earnings reports. Chloe, for her part, had decided that Victoria was essentially a very tall, very interesting friend who asked questions about homework and knew weirdly specific facts about economics. Why does Victoria know so much about money? Chloe asked one night while Ethan was tucking her into bed. It's her job, Ethan said. She helps run the hospital, and that means understanding how money works. Is she your girlfriend? The question hit Ethan like a physical impact. What? No, we're friends. Chloe gave him the particular look that 7-year-olds give adults when they know said adults are lying to themselves. Okay, Dad. We are, Ethan insisted. I like her, Chloe said, already closing her eyes. She's nice, and she laughs at my jokes. Ethan stood there for a moment after Chloe fell asleep, her words echoing in his head. Was Victoria his girlfriend? No, obviously not. They were just two people who'd been thrown together by circumstances and discovered they actually enjoyed each other's company. The fact that Ethan found himself thinking about her at odd moments during his shifts, or that his chest did something complicated when she smiled, or that he'd started actually caring about how he looked before their Friday coffee meetings, none of that meant anything significant. Except maybe it did. He was still thinking about it 3 days later when his phone rang at 2 in the morning during a rare quiet moment in the nurse's station. Victoria's name appeared on the screen and Ethan felt his stomach drop because nobody called at 2 a.m. with good news. "Hello?" he answered. "Ethan?" Victoria's voice was tight and controlled in a way that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "I need help." "What's wrong?" "I'm at my apartment. I was reviewing contracts for tomorrow's board meeting, and I started having chest pain, left side radiating to my jaw. I took aspirin. I know the symptoms. I think I'm having a heart attack." Ethan was already moving, grabbing his jacket and heading for the exit. "Have you called 911? "No." "Victoria, I need you to tell me if I'm overreacting," she said. "I can't show up to a hospital in an ambulance because I panicked over nothing. The board is already looking for reasons to question my leadership. If I'm wrong about this—" "I don't care about the board," Ethan interrupted, pushing through the stairwell door and taking the stairs 2 at a time. "I care about you not dying. What's your address?" She gave it to him. "A building in the Gold Coast, because of course she lived in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Chicago." "I'm 20 minutes away," Ethan said, already in his car and pulling out of the parking garage. "Stay on the phone with me. Are you still having pain?" "Yes, it's getting worse." "On a scale of 1 to 10? 7, maybe 8? Any shortness of breath?" "Some, and I feel nauseous." "Okay," Ethan said, forcing his voice to stay calm even though his brain was screaming. "I need you to unlock your front door if you can do it safely. Then sit down somewhere comfortable and try to stay calm. Keep the aspirin nearby. If the pain gets significantly worse or you start having trouble breathing, you call 911 immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes." "I'm coming as fast as I can," Ethan said. He made the drive in 14 minutes by ignoring several traffic laws and praying Chicago's sparse late-night police presence wouldn't notice. Victoria's building had a doorman who looked skeptical until Ethan explained he was a nurse responding to a medical emergency, at which point the guy practically shoved him toward the elevator. 30th floor, corner unit. The door was unlocked like Victoria had promised. Ethan found her sitting on a leather couch in a living room that looked like something from an architecture magazine. All clean lines and expensive furniture and windows overlooking the city lights. She was pale and sweating, one hand pressed against her chest. "Hey," Ethan said, dropping down next to her and immediately checking her pulse. "I'm here." "I feel stupid," Victoria said. "You're not stupid. Tell me exactly what happened." She described the symptoms in clinical detail because apparently even during a potential cardiac emergency, Victoria Sinclair couldn't stop being precise and analytical. Ethan listened while doing a rapid assessment, pulse elevated but regular, breathing shallow, skin cool and clammy. The symptoms were textbook enough to be concerning. "We need to go to the hospital," Ethan said. "Are you sure it's not just anxiety?" Victoria asked. "I've been under a lot of stress. The board meeting tomorrow is—" "Victoria," Ethan interrupted gently. "Stop trying to diagnose yourself. Let me do my job." Something in his tone must have gotten through because she nodded and let him help her stand. He grabbed her coat and her phone and guided her toward the door, one hand on her elbow to steady her. "I'm taking you to Riverside," Ethan said in the elevator. "We're going to walk in through the ER entrance. I'm going to explain the situation, and they're going to get you triaged immediately. No ambulance, no drama, okay?" Okay, Victoria said quietly. The drive to Riverside took another 15 minutes. Victoria sat in the passenger seat with her eyes closed, her hands still pressed against her chest. Ethan kept talking to her the entire time, asking questions about her pain levels, monitoring her breathing, keeping her conscious and alert. When they pulled up to the ER entrance, he helped her out of the car and straight through the automatic doors. The triage nurse on duty looked up and her eyes went wide. "Is that—" "Victoria Sinclair, 30 years old, chest pain radiating to jaw, onset approximately 40 minutes ago," Ethan said rapidly. "Possible MI. She needs to be seen immediately." The ER exploded into controlled chaos. Within 3 minutes, Victoria was in a bed with an EKG running, oxygen on, IV placed, and 2 doctors examining her while nurses moved around with practiced efficiency. Ethan stood back and let them work, his hands shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. One of the ER doctors, Dr. Harrison, someone Ethan vaguely recognized from staff meetings, came over to him after the initial assessment. "You brought her in?" "Yes." "Good call," Harrison said. "EKG shows ST elevation. She's having a STEMI. We're taking her to the cath lab now." A STEMI. ST elevation myocardial infarction. A major heart attack that required immediate intervention to prevent permanent heart damage or death. Ethan felt like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "She's 30 years old," he heard himself say. "I know," Harrison replied, "but it happens. We're taking good care of her." They wheeled Victoria toward the cardiac catheterization lab within minutes. She was conscious and aware enough to reach out and grab Ethan's hand as they passed. "Don't leave," she said. "I'm not going anywhere, It's about the..." Ethan promised. The procedure took 2 hours. Ethan spent them in the surgical waiting area, pacing back and forth while his brain cycled through every worst-case scenario his medical training had ever taught him. People died from heart attacks. Young people. Healthy people. People who seemed fine one moment and were gone the next. He couldn't lose Victoria. The realization hit him with startling clarity somewhere around hour 1 of waiting. He couldn't lose her because somewhere in the last few months, she'd become important to him in ways he hadn't fully acknowledged. Not just as a friend, not just as his boss, as someone he cared about deeply and maybe, probably, was falling in love with, which was terrifying for about 17 different reasons, not least of which was the fact that she was still technically his employer, and this kind of relationship was probably against multiple HR policies. But none of that mattered if she didn't survive. Dr. Harrison finally emerged at 4:30 in the morning. "She's stable," he said immediately, and Ethan felt his legs nearly give out from relief. "We placed a stent in her left anterior descending artery. There was a significant blockage. Another hour or 2 and we'd be looking at major heart damage." "But she's okay?" Ethan asked. "She will be," Harrison said. "She'll need to stay here for observation, and there'll be lifestyle changes and medications, but she should make a full recovery. You saved her life by bringing her in when you did." Ethan sat down heavily in one of the waiting room chairs and pressed his hands against his face. He'd been holding himself together through sheer willpower for the last 3 hours, and now that the crisis had passed, he felt like he might fall apart. "Can I see her?" he asked. "She's in recovery now," Harrison said. "Give it another hour, then I'll have someone take you back." Ethan called Marcus to explain why he wouldn't be finishing his shift. Then he called Chloe's babysitter to make sure she could stay through the morning. Then he sat in the waiting area and watched the sun come up over Chicago, while his brain slowly accepted that Victoria was alive and going to be fine. They let him in to see her at 6 a.m. She was in a private recovery room, hooked up to monitors and IVs, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital bed. Her eyes were closed, but they opened when Ethan pulled a chair up next to her. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," Victoria replied. Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube. "You stayed. I told you I would." "You also saved my life, apparently," Victoria said. Dr. Harrison was very emphatic about that. "Colt, you called me," Ethan pointed out. "That was the smart part." They were quiet for a moment. The monitors beeped steadily in the background. Early morning light filtered through the window, casting everything in soft gold. "I was so scared," Victoria admitted quietly. "Not of dying, of being wrong, of looking weak, of..." She stopped. "I almost didn't call you because I was more afraid of seeming incompetent than I was afraid of having a heart attack." "Victoria, that's insane," she continued. "That's genuinely insane. And it's what I've become, so obsessed with appearing strong and capable that I'd rather die than admit I need help." Ethan reached out and took her hand carefully, avoiding the IV line. "But you did call. That's what matters." "Because I trust you," Victoria said. "You're the first person in 15 years that I've actually trusted to see me weak and not use it against me." Something in Ethan's chest cracked open. "I would never use anything against you." "I know," Victoria said. "That's why I called." A nurse came in to check Victoria's vitals. interrupting the moment. Ethan stepped back to give her space to work. When the nurse left, Victoria looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Ethan," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay?" "I've been lying to myself for months," Victoria said, "pretending that we're just friends. That these coffee meetings and weekend outings with Chloe are just casual social interactions. But they're not. At least not for me." Ethan felt his heart rate pick up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I have feelings for you," Victoria said bluntly. "Actual feelings. The kind that make me check my phone hoping you've texted. The kind that make me nervous before our Friday meetings. The kind that make me want to be around you and your daughter as much as possible because you both make me feel like maybe I could be someone better than I've been." Ethan stared at her. "You nearly died 3 hours ago and you're using this as an opportunity to confess your feelings?" "I nearly died 3 hours ago and realized I didn't want to die without telling you the truth," Victoria corrected. "So yes, I'm confessing. While heavily medicated and probably not making good decisions, but I'm doing it anyway." A laugh escaped Ethan before he could stop it. "You're ridiculous." "Is that a rejection?" "Oh, no," Ethan said. "It's me trying to figure out how to tell you that I feel the same way without it sounding like I'm taking advantage of someone who just had major cardiac surgery." Victoria smiled, that genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "So you have feelings for me too?" "Terrifying ones," Ethan admitted. "The kind that make me panic because you're my boss and this violates probably every workplace policy in existence. The kind that make me think about you when I should be focusing on work. The kind that made me drive like a maniac through Chicago at 2 in the morning because the thought of something happening to you was unbearable." "So what do we do about it?" Victoria asked. "Right now?" "Nothing," Ethan said. "Right now you recover. We figure out your treatment plan. We make sure you're actually okay, and then—" He paused. "Then we figure out the rest." "That's very practical," Victoria said. "One of us has to be," Ethan pointed out, "since you're apparently determined to have emotional revelations while on post-surgical pain medication." Victoria laughed, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts." "Sorry." "Don't apologize either," Victoria said. "Just stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan promised again. He stayed through the morning while Victoria slept off the anesthesia and pain medication. He was there when she woke up and insisted on trying to check her work email despite doctor's orders. He was there when the cardiologist came to explain the long-term care plan and the lifestyle modifications she'd need to make. He was there when she got frustrated and scared and angry at her own body for betraying her. Around noon, Ethan finally left to pick up Chloe from school and explained that Victoria was sick and would need to stay in the hospital for a few days. "Is she going to be okay?" Chloe asked, her voice small and worried. "Yes," Ethan said. "She's going to be fine, but she needs to rest." "Can we visit her?" Ethan thought about hospital policies and visiting hours, and whether bringing a 7-year-old to see someone in cardiac recovery was appropriate. Then he thought about Victoria's face when she talked about trusting people and not wanting to die without saying what mattered. "Yeah," he said, "we can visit her." They stopped at home first so Chloe could make a card. She spent 30 minutes on it, using every marker in her collection to create something that said "Get well soon" in letters that took up most of the page. She drew a picture of the three of them, her in the middle, Ethan and Victoria on either side, all holding hands. "That's us," Chloe explained unnecessarily. "Together." Ethan looked at the drawing and felt something expand in his chest. "It's perfect, kiddo." They arrived at the hospital around 3 p.m. Victoria was awake and sitting up slightly in bed, looking better than she had that morning but still exhausted. Her face lit up when she saw Chloe. "Hi," Victoria said softly. "Hi," Chloe replied shyly. "I made you a card." She handed it over carefully. Victoria took it and studied it for a long moment, her eyes getting suspiciously bright. "This is beautiful," Victoria said. "Can I keep it?" "Oh." Chloe nodded enthusiastically. "Dad says you have to rest, but we can visit until you feel better." "I'd like that," Victoria said. They stayed for an hour. Chloe chattered about school and told Victoria stories about her friends and asked questions about what it was like to have surgery. Victoria answered patiently, clearly exhausted but making the effort because Chloe was there. Ethan watched them together and felt his heart do that complicated thing it had been doing for weeks now whenever he saw them interact. This could be real, he thought. This strange, accidental family they'd stumbled into. It could actually work. When visiting hours were over, Chloe hugged Victoria carefully, mindful of the IVs and monitors. "I'm glad you're okay," Chloe said seriously. "We need you." Victoria's voice was thick when she replied, "I need you too, both of you." In the parking lot afterward, Chloe took Ethan's hand. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Victoria loves us, right?" Ethan stopped walking. "Why do you ask that?" "Because she looked at us the way you look at me," Chloe said simply. "Like we're the most important thing. Kids noticed everything. Ethan kept learning that lesson over and over. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think she does." "Good," Chloe said, "because I love her too." Victoria stayed in the hospital for 4 days. Ethan visited every day, bringing Chloe when he could and coming alone when he couldn't. They talked about everything and nothing, hospital gossip and Chloe's school progress and Victoria's frustration with being confined to bed rest. They carefully didn't talk about the feelings they'd confessed until Victoria was being discharged, and the reality of what came next became unavoidable. "I need to figure out the work situation," Victoria said while Ethan drove her home from the hospital. "The board knows about the heart attack. They're going to use it to question my capability." "Let them," Ethan said. "You're recovering from a life-threatening medical emergency. You're allowed to be human." "Being human isn't valued in corporate leadership," Victoria said. "Being human is seen as weakness." "Then change what's valued," Ethan said. "You're the CEO. You have that power." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Ethan admitted, "but it's right. And I think you're done with just doing what's efficient instead of what's right." They pulled up to Victoria's building. Ethan helped her upstairs, carrying the bag of discharge paperwork and medications while Victoria moved slowly, still recovering. Her apartment felt different now, less like a showroom and more like a place where an actual person lived. Or maybe Ethan just saw it differently, now that he knew the person who lived there. "Thank you, Victoria said once they were inside. "For everything. For saving my life, for staying, for—" She paused. "For caring." "That's not something you need to thank me for," Ethan said. "Yes, it is," Victoria said, "because nobody else has. Not like this. Not without wanting something in return." Ethan set down the bag and turned to face her fully. "I want something in return." Victoria's expression shuddered slightly. "What?" "I want you to take care of yourself," Ethan said. "Actually, take care of yourself. Rest when you need to rest. Ask for help when you need help. Stop treating your body like it's a machine that should function perfectly without maintenance. That's what I want." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "And nothing else?" "Ush." "Well," Ethan said carefully, "I'd also like to take you to dinner once you're cleared by your cardiologist. Actual dinner, like a date." "Mo? Bo? A smile spread across Victoria's face. "A date." "If you're interested," Ethan said. "I'm interested," Victoria said. "But we need to address the work situation first. I can't date an employee. That's a legitimate ethics concern." "So promote me," Ethan suggested. "Make it a lateral relationship instead of a supervisory one." Victoria laughed. "You want me to give you a promotion so we can date?" "I want you to do whatever makes this work," Ethan said honestly, "because I'm tired of pretending this isn't happening. Chloe drew us as a family. She's 7 years old and she's already figured out what we've been dancing around for months." "What are we dancing around?" Victoria asked. Ethan stepped closer. "That we're good together. That we make each other better. That this thing between us, whatever it is, it's real and it's worth figuring out." Victoria reached out and took his hand. "I'm terrified." "Me too," Ethan admitted. "I don't know how to do this," Victoria said. "Relationships, vulnerability, letting someone see all the broken parts. Nobody knows how to do it," Ethan said. "We're all just making it up as we go." "That's a terrible strategy," Victoria said. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "But it's the only one we've got." They stood there together in Victoria's apartment while the afternoon light faded outside the windows. Ethan could hear the city sounds filtering up from 30 floors below, traffic and construction, and the ambient noise of millions of people living their lives. It felt momentous and ordinary at the same time, this moment where everything could change or nothing could change depending on what happened next. Okay, Victoria said finally. Let's figure this out. Together. Together, Ethan echoed. She leaned in carefully, mindful of her still healing chest, and kissed him. It was soft and brief, and tasted like the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet, but both wanted to try. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling. That was a terrible idea given that you just got out of the hospital, Ethan supplied. I was going to say perfect, Victoria said, but your version works too. Ethan laughed and pulled her into a careful hug, holding her like she was something precious that might break if he wasn't careful enough. Which, in a way, she was. They both were. The next few weeks were complicated in the way that real life was always complicated. Victoria took medical leave while she recovered, which meant the board started circling like sharks who'd scented blood in the water. There were emergency meetings and concerned phone calls and pointed questions about whether someone who'd had a major cardiac event at 30 was really fit to run a hospital. Victoria handled it with the same ruthless efficiency she'd always brought to corporate warfare, except now there was something different beneath it. A recognition that being strong didn't mean never showing weakness. She was honest about her condition. She shared her recovery plan. She made it clear that having a health crisis made her more qualified to run a healthcare facility, not less. I understand now what our patients go through, she told the board during one contentious meeting that Ethan heard about secondhand. The fear, the vulnerability, the way the system can either support you or fail you depending on who's making the decisions. I'm going to make sure we support people. That's not negotiable. Half the board resigned within a month. Victoria replaced them with people who actually cared about patient outcomes instead of just profit margins. The hospital culture continued to shift. Slowly. Imperfectly. With plenty of resistance from people who'd preferred the old way of doing things. But it shifted nonetheless. And through all of it, Victoria and Ethan figured out how to be together. It wasn't smooth. They argued about work-life boundaries and whether it was appropriate for Victoria to give Ethan feedback on his clinical work when they were also dating. They disagreed about how much time Victoria should be spending at the hospital while she was supposed to be recovering. They had to navigate Chloe's questions about what Victoria's role was in their life and whether this meant she was going to be around permanently. But they figured it out. Messily. Honestly, like real people instead of characters in a story where everything worked perfectly. 2 months after Victoria's heart attack, the hospital board officially approved the creation of a new position, Director of Pediatric Care. It was a leadership role that reported directly to the Chief Medical Officer instead of to the CEO's office, which meant Ethan would no longer be in Victoria's direct chain of command. Is this a real position, or did you create it just so we could date? Ethan asked when Victoria offered it to him. It's a real position that this hospital has needed for 3 years, Victoria said. The fact that it also solves our ethics problem is just convenient. And if I say no, then we figure something else out, Victoria said. But you should say yes, because you're the right person for this job, and you know it. Ethan took the position. He moved to day shifts. He hired 3 new nurses with the budget Victoria approved. He implemented family-centered care policies that actually considered what families needed instead of just what was operationally convenient. It felt like building something that mattered. 3 months after the heart attack, Victoria and Ethan finally had their first official date. Dinner at a restaurant downtown, just the two of them, no hospital talk allowed. They lasted approximately 15 minutes before they started discussing a new pediatric mental health initiative Victoria wanted to fund. We're terrible at this, Ethan said, laughing. At dating? Victoria asked. At pretending we can separate work from the rest of our lives, Ethan said. We both care too much, and is that a bad thing? No, Ethan said. It's just who we are. They went back to Victoria's apartment after dinner. She'd been slowly adding personal touches, photos on the walls, books on the shelves, a ridiculous coffee maker that Chloe had picked out during a shopping trip. It looked lived in now, like a home instead of a showroom. I love you, Victoria said suddenly. Ethan looked at her. Yeah? Yeah, Victoria said. I know it's only been a few months and we're still figuring things out and nothing about this is conventional, but I love you. Both of you. You and Chloe. You make me want to be better than I've been. You are better, Ethan said quietly. You've changed everything. We changed everything, Victoria corrected. You showed me how. Ethan pulled her close and kissed her properly this time, not the careful post-surgical kiss from months ago, but something deeper and more certain. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling. I love you too, Ethan said, in case that wasn't clear. It was clear, Victoria said, but it's nice to hear anyway. Us. They stood there together in her apartment high above the city, two people who'd started as enemies and become something neither of them had expected. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was real and honest and worth fighting for. And that was enough. 6 months after Victoria's heart attack, Riverside Children's Hospital announced the launch of the Sinclair Family Care Initiative, a comprehensive program that provided medical care for children from families who couldn't afford treatment. The press release went out on a Tuesday morning, and by noon, every major news outlet in Chicago was running the story. Ethan watched it happen from his new office on the 4th floor, a space that still felt too big and too official for someone who'd spent 3 years working overnight shifts in scrubs that smelled like disinfectant. His desk had actual paperwork on it now, instead of just patient charts. His door had a nameplate that said Director of Pediatric Care. His phone kept ringing with interview requests from reporters who wanted to know about the revolutionary changes happening at Riverside. He ignored most of them. The work wasn't revolutionary. It was just decent. It was just treating people like they mattered, instead of like they were line items on a balance sheet. Victoria had taken the lead on the press conferences because she was better at that kind of thing, standing in front of cameras and explaining complex policy changes in sound bites that made sense to people who'd never worked in healthcare. But Ethan knew the real story. He'd been there for the late-night strategy sessions where Victoria had fought with board members who thought compassion was a luxury they couldn't afford. He'd watched her dig through budget reports at 2 in the morning, finding money in places nobody else thought to look. He'd seen her cry exactly once, alone in her office. When she'd finally gotten the votes, she needed to approve the initiative. You should be proud, Marcus told him during a break room conversation. This whole thing happened because you refused to accept how things were. It happened because Victoria decided to change, Ethan corrected. It happened because you showed her she could, Marcus said. Don't diminish that, Oates. Maybe that was true. Maybe the butterfly effect of Ethan checking his phone during a staff meeting had somehow led to transforming an entire hospital's culture. Or maybe it was just coincidence and timing and 100 other factors that couldn't be traced back to any single moment. Either way, the changes were real. The pediatric ward had expanded to include a family support center where parents could sleep, shower, and eat without leaving the hospital. The staff-to-patient ratio had improved across every department. The new family leave policy had reduced turnover by 30%. And most importantly, kids were getting care regardless of their family's ability to pay. It wasn't perfect. There were still insurance fights and budget constraints and bureaucratic nightmares that made Ethan want to scream. But it was better. Measurably, quantifiably better. Chloe thought the whole thing was boring. Can we stop talking about the hospital? She asked one night at dinner, a dinner that included Victoria, who'd started staying over more nights than not. They were eating at Ethan's apartment because Victoria's place still felt too formal for casual family meals. And somewhere along the way, they'd become a family. What do you want to talk about instead? Victoria asked, serving herself more of the pasta Ethan had made. My science project, Chloe said immediately. We're doing ecosystems and I want to build a terrarium, but Dad says I can't keep it in my room because I'll forget to take care of it. That's because you forgot to take care of the last 3 plants we got you, Ethan pointed out. Those were different, Chloe argued. Those were boring plants. A terrarium is like a whole tiny world. I definitely remember. Victoria looked at Ethan. What if we supervised it together? Made it a shared responsibility? We? Ethan asked. Yes, we, Victoria said. I'm here most of the time anyway. Might as well make myself useful. Chloe's face lit up. Does that mean you're going to live here? The question hung in the air like something fragile and important. Victoria and Ethan had been circling around that conversation for weeks, talking about logistics and timing and whether it was too soon or whether they were overthinking something that felt inevitable. Would you want me to? Victoria asked Chloe carefully. Obviously, Chloe said, like it was the most ridiculous question in the world. You're already here all the time. You should just bring your stuff and stay. Victoria looked at Ethan. What do you think? I think my daughter just made an excellent point, Ethan said. You're here all the time, and I like that you're here. So if you wanted to make it official, I want to, Victoria said quickly. I've wanted to for a while. I just didn't want to push. You're not pushing, Ethan said. You're joining. There's a difference. Chloe cheered like her team had just won the Super Bowl. Victoria laughed, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Some piece of anxiety he'd been carrying around about whether this was all moving too fast, or whether Victoria would eventually realize she'd made a mistake getting involved with a single father and his chaotic life. She wasn't making a mistake. She was choosing them, deliberately, consciously, with full awareness of what that meant. They spent the weekend moving Victoria's things. Not all of them. She kept her apartment because it made financial sense, and because she sometimes needed a quiet place to work without a 7-year-old asking questions every 5 minutes. But enough of her things that Ethan's apartment started feeling like their apartment. Her books on the shelves, her coffee maker in the kitchen, her ridiculous collection of expensive running shoes in the closet, because apparently Victoria dealt with stress by running 6 miles before sunrise. This is weird, Victoria said on Sunday night, standing in the bedroom and looking at the mixture of their belongings. Good weird, but weird. You can still back out, Ethan said. No pressure. I don't want to back out, Victoria said. I just keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong, for this to be too good to be real. It's real, Ethan said. Messy and complicated and real. Yeah, Victoria agreed. They fell into a routine that was equal parts domestic and chaotic. Victoria still worked long hours at the hospital, but now she came home to Ethan and Chloe instead of an empty apartment. Ethan still worked day shifts and handled most of Chloe's school logistics, but now he had Victoria to share dinner with and talk through problems with, and occasionally argue with about whose turn it was to do dishes. Chloe adapted to having Victoria around with the kind of easy acceptance that kids did when adults didn't make things unnecessarily complicated. She asked Victoria for help with homework. She demanded that Victoria attend her school talent show, where she sang a song off-key but with tremendous confidence. She started leaving drawings on Victoria's pillow, stick figures labeled Dad. Me and Victoria doing various activities like going to the park or eating pancakes or standing in front of the hospital. She's drawing us as a unit, Victoria observed one night, looking at the latest artwork. That feels significant. It is significant, Ethan said. She sees you as family. That's what kids do. They decide who belongs, and then they just accept it as fact. Is that what you do too? Victoria asked. Just accept it? No, Ethan said honestly. I thought about it a lot first, worried about it, questioned whether it was fair to Chloe, or to you, or to the memory of my wife. But eventually I realized I was overthinking something simple. I love you. Chloe loves you. You love us. That's family. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I never thought I'd have this. I spent so long building walls that I convinced myself I didn't want it. But I do. I want this exactly. Good, Ethan said, because you're stuck with us now. The real test came in month 7 when everything that could go wrong did. It started with the hospital board hiring an external auditor to review all of Victoria's policy changes and budget allocations. Someone, probably one of the executives Victoria had fired, had convinced the board that the Sinclair Family Care Initiative was financially unsustainable and would bankrupt the hospital within 2 years. They're trying to dismantle everything we built, Victoria said, pacing around their living room at midnight while Ethan sat on the couch and Chloe slept peacefully in her room. Every single program, every policy change, they want to roll it all back and return to the way things were. They can't do that, Ethan said. They absolutely can, Victoria replied. I'm the CEO, but the board has ultimate authority. If they vote to reverse my decisions, I can fight them, but I might lose. And if I lose, then we figure out another way, Ethan said. But we don't give up. Victoria stopped pacing and looked at him. You say that like it's simple, but it's not simple, Ethan said. But it's true. You've changed this hospital. You've changed people's lives. Those families who got care because of your initiative, they're real. Their kids are healthy because of decisions you made. The board can't take that away. They can stop it from happening for future families, Victoria said quietly. And that might be worse. The audit took 3 weeks. During that time, Victoria barely slept. She provided documentation for every expenditure, every policy decision, every structural change she'd implemented. She built a case that the new programs weren't just ethically right, they were financially sound. Better patient outcomes meant lower readmission rates. Family support meant faster recovery times. Adequate staffing meant fewer errors and lower malpractice costs. The numbers backed her up. But numbers didn't always matter when people had already made up their minds. The board meeting where they'd vote on the audit recommendations was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon. Victoria wore her most intimidating suit, the navy one that made her look like she could fire you just by making eye contact. She went over her presentation 3 times the night before, practicing in front of Ethan and occasionally asking him questions about specific clinical outcomes. "You're going to be great," Ethan told her at midnight when she was still rehearsing. "What if I'm not?" Victoria asked. "What if I've spent 6 months building something that gets torn down in an afternoon?" "Then you'll have still spent 6 months helping people," Ethan said. "And that matters even if it doesn't last forever." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "How are you so calm about this?" "Ok, I'm not calm," Ethan admitted. "I'm terrified. But I also know that you're the smartest, most determined person I've ever met. And if anyone can win this fight, it's you." The board meeting lasted 4 hours. Ethan didn't attend. It was a closed executive session, but he tracked the time obsessively from his office, checking his phone every few minutes for updates that didn't come. When Victoria finally called at 6 p.m., her voice was shaking. "We won," she said. Ethan felt his entire body sag with relief. "What happened?" "I presented the data, showed them the outcomes, brought in testimonials from families whose kids received care through the initiative, and I told them," her voice cracked slightly, "I told them about my father, about watching him die because a hospital turned him away, about spending 20 years building an empire so I'd never feel that powerless again, and about realizing that the only way to honor his memory was to make sure no other kid lost a parent because the system failed them." "Okay, sai. Victoria, the board approved everything," Victoria continued. "Not just approved, expanded the budget. They want to make Riverside a model for family-centered care that other hospitals can replicate. They offered me a contract extension through 2030. "That's incredible," Ethan said. "I know," Victoria said, and now she was crying. "I know. And I couldn't have done it without you showing me what actually matters, without you teaching me that being strong means being human, not being invulnerable." "Boss might suts." "Come home," Ethan said. "Let's celebrate." But when Victoria arrived an hour later, she looked exhausted and triumphant and slightly stunned. Chloe had made a congratulations banner that was mostly crooked and covered in glitter. They ordered pizza and ate it in the living room while Chloe regaled Victoria with detailed descriptions of her school day. Later, after Chloe was asleep, Victoria and Ethan sat together on the couch, with the TV playing something neither of them was watching. "I keep thinking about what you said," Victoria said quietly, "about how, even if it didn't last, it would still have mattered." "Yeah? That's what I never understood before, Victoria said. "I thought everything had to be permanent to be valuable, that if something could be taken away, it wasn't worth building in the first place. But that's not true. The families we helped, that mattered regardless of what happens next. The culture we changed, that mattered. The people we cared for, that mattered." "You matter," Ethan said simply. Victoria turned to look at him. "To who?" "To me," Ethan said. "To Chloe. To every family whose kid got treatment because you decided to be better than the system that failed your father. You matter to a lot of people, Victoria. I hope you know that." "I'm starting to," Victoria said. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just existing together in the space they'd built. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual nighttime energy, cars and voices and life happening in millions of different ways. Inside, Ethan felt the particular peace that came from knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. The following Sunday, Victoria asked Chloe if she wanted to help bake cookies. This was significant because Victoria had never baked anything in her life and considered cooking a mysterious process that other people did. But she'd been researching recipes and had purchased actual measuring cups, and apparently decided this was the weekend to try. The kitchen descended into chaos within 20 minutes. Flour everywhere. Chocolate chips being eaten directly from the bag. A minor crisis when nobody could find the vanilla extract. Ethan supervised from a safe distance, taking photos and occasionally offering advice that neither of them listened to. "This is harder than running a hospital," Victoria declared at one point, covered in flour and looking frustrated. "That's because running a hospital doesn't require precise measurements and timing," Ethan said. "Baking is chemistry." "I'm bad at chemistry," Victoria muttered. "You're doing great," Chloe said loyally. "These are going to be the best cookies ever." They were not, in fact, the best cookies ever. They were slightly burned on the edges and undercooked in the middle and oddly shaped because the dough had been unevenly distributed. But they were edible, and more importantly, they'd been made together. "We should make this a tradition," Chloe announced, eating her third cookie despite the questionable texture. "Every Sunday, family baking day." "I'm not sure the kitchen can survive that," Ethan said. "The kitchen will be fine," Victoria said. "And I like the idea of traditions, things we do together, ways of marking time that matter." She looked at Ethan when she said it, and he understood that she wasn't just talking about baking. She was talking about building a life, creating patterns and rhythms that transform three separate people into something cohesive and permanent, a family. They'd never officially discussed what that meant, or what labels to use, or how to explain their relationship to people who asked. But standing in the kitchen, surrounded by flour and burned cookies and Chloe's laughter, Ethan thought maybe they didn't need to discuss it. Some things were too obvious to require explanation. 2 months later, on a random Tuesday in June, Ethan came home from work to find Victoria and Chloe sitting at the kitchen table with serious expressions. "We need to talk," Chloe announced. Ethan felt a spike of anxiety. "About what?" "About Victoria's last name, let's see," Chloe said. "It's different from ours. That's confusing." Ethan looked at Victoria, who was clearly trying not to laugh. "Is it confusing?" "Yes," Chloe said firmly, "because we're a family, and families should have the same name, so Victoria should either change her name to Vale, or we should all change our names to Sinclair, or we should pick a completely new name that all of us like." "That's an interesting proposal," Ethan said carefully. "I have a fourth option," Victoria said, "but I wanted to run it by both of you first." She pulled something out of her pocket, a small velvet box that made Ethan's heart stop. "I know this is unconventional," Victoria said, looking nervous in a way Ethan had rarely seen. "And I know we've only been together for less than a year, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with both of you, so..." She opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. "Ethan Vale, will you marry me?" Ethan couldn't speak. His throat had closed up and his eyes were burning and his brain had temporarily short-circuited. "Is that a yes?" Victoria asked after a moment. "Yes," Ethan managed. "Obviously, yes." Chloe cheered and jumped up from her chair. Victoria stood up too, and Ethan pulled her into a kiss, while their daughter cheered in the background like they'd just won something important, which, in a way, they had. They'd won the chance to keep choosing each other every day, to build something permanent out of accidental encounters and crises that had forced them to see each other clearly, to be a family in all the ways that mattered. The wedding happened 3 months later in the hospital's rooftop garden that Victoria had commissioned specifically so that staff and families would have a peaceful place to go when things got overwhelming. It was small and simple, just close friends, a handful of colleagues, Chloe as the flower girl wearing a dress she'd picked out herself. Marcus was Ethan's best man. He gave a speech about how he'd watched Ethan nearly get fired multiple times and thought Victoria was going to be the final nail in his career coffin. Instead, somehow, they'd transformed each other and the entire hospital in the process. "I still don't fully understand how it happened," Marcus said. "But I'm glad it did, because you two are proof that people can change, that systems can change. That compassion isn't weakness. It's actually the hardest, bravest thing you can choose." Victoria's maid of honor was the former head of cardiology, the doctor who'd saved her life during the heart attack. She talked about watching Victoria go from someone who treated her body like a machine to someone who understood that being human meant accepting vulnerability. "She nearly died because she was too proud to ask for help," the doctor said. "Now she's built an entire hospital culture around the idea that asking for help is strength. That's growth. That's courage. That's love." Chloe gave her own speech, written on index cards with help from her second-grade teacher. She talked about how she used to worry that her dad was lonely and how Victoria made him smile more, and how now they were all going to have the same last name and be a real family. I already thought we were a real family, Chloe said seriously. But now it's official, and I'm really happy about that. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Ethan and Victoria exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Victoria promised to keep learning how to be human instead of perfect. Ethan promised to keep reminding her that strength came in many forms. They both promised to build a life that honored the people they'd lost and the people they'd found. When they kissed, Chloe clapped so loudly that several people laughed. The reception was held in one of the hospital conference rooms that had been transformed with flowers and string lights. They ate cake and danced and took photos. At one point, Ethan found himself standing with Marcus and looking around at all the people who'd shown up to celebrate. "You know what's wild?" Marcus said. "A year ago, Victoria Sinclair was the most hated person in this hospital. Now look at her." Ethan looked. Victoria was crouched down talking to a small child, someone's kid, who'd wandered over from the pediatric ward where they were visiting a sibling. She was showing the kid her wedding ring and explaining what marriage meant with the kind of patient attention she never would have had a year ago. "People can change," Ethan said quietly, "if they want to badly enough, and if someone shows them it's possible." "You showed her," Marcus said. "She chose to change," Ethan corrected. "I just gave her a reason to try." Later that night, after the reception had ended and Chloe had been picked up by her babysitter for a planned sleepover, Ethan and Victoria returned to their apartment as a married couple. They were too tired for anything dramatic. They just changed into comfortable clothes and collapsed on the couch together. "We did it," Victoria said. "Did what?" "Ha! Built something real," Victoria said. "Something that matters. A family. A life. A completely different future than either of us expected a year ago." "Are you happy?" Ethan asked. Victoria thought about it. "Yes. Terrified and uncertain and happy. Is that normal?" "I think that's exactly what normal is supposed to feel like," Ethan said. They sat together in the quiet apartment, listening to the city outside and feeling the weight of everything that had brought them here. All the crises and conflicts and moments where things could have gone completely differently. All the choices they'd made that had led to this exact moment. "I've been thinking about my father a lot lately," Victoria said quietly, "about what he would think of all this. The hospital, the initiatives, me marrying a nurse and becoming a stepmother to a 7-year-old. "What do you think he'd say?" Ethan asked. "I think he'd say I finally figured out what actually matters," Victoria said. "Not money or power or building empires, just helping people, taking care of the people you love, being brave enough to admit when you need help." "Those are good lessons," Ethan said. "They're the only lessons that matter," Victoria replied. "Everything else is just noise." She leaned against him, and Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stayed like that for a long time, just breathing together, being together, existing in the life they'd accidentally built out of anger and crisis and the particular kind of courage it took to let someone see you completely. A year ago, Ethan had been a single father barely surviving on night shifts and coffee and the desperate determination to give his daughter a stable life. Victoria had been a billionaire CEO who'd built walls so high nobody could see the scared kid underneath. Now they were married. They were a family. They'd changed a hospital and helped countless families and learned how to be human together in a world that often punished humanity. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There would be more crises and more conflicts and more moments where everything felt impossible. But they'd face those together, as partners, as equals, as people who'd learned that strength wasn't about being invulnerable. It was about being brave enough to let someone else hold you when you couldn't hold yourself. "I love you," Ethan said quietly. "I love you too," Victoria replied. "Both of you. This whole messy, complicated, beautiful life we've built. It's pretty good, isn't it?" Ethan said. "It's everything," Victoria said, and she was right. Because here's what Ethan had learned over the past year. Through all the chaos and change and unexpected transformations, life didn't wait for perfect moments or perfect people. Life happened in the mess. In the moments when you were too tired to pretend anymore. In the crises that forced you to show who you really were underneath all the armor and expectations. People spent so much time trying to be invulnerable, thinking that strength meant never needing anyone. But real strength was admitting when you were scared, asking for help when you needed it, letting someone see all your broken pieces, and trusting they wouldn't use them against you. Victoria had learned that. Ethan had always known it, but had forgotten he deserved it too. Together, they'd built something that honored both truths, that you could be strong and vulnerable simultaneously, that you could change systems and change yourself, that you could survive loss and still find joy again. Chloe had been right from the beginning with her crayon drawings and her matter-of-fact acceptance of their unconventional family. Families didn't always begin the way you expected. Sometimes they began with conflict and fear, and people who seemed like enemies. Sometimes they began with a phone call at 2 in the morning and a crisis that forced you to see clearly what mattered most. Sometimes they began with a single father who refused to apologize for loving his daughter more than his career, and a billionaire CEO who'd forgotten how to be human until someone reminded her. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, those beginnings led to something permanent and precious and real. Ethan looked around their apartment at the mixture of his things and Victoria's things and Chloe's things all jumbled together in a space that felt like home. He thought about the hospital and the families they'd helped and the culture they'd changed together. He thought about all the people who'd been touched by Victoria's transformation from ruthless executive to someone who genuinely cared about the human cost of every decision. Change was possible. That was the lesson. Not easy, not quick, not without pain and struggle and moments where you wanted to give up. But possible. You just had to be willing to try, to fail, to keep trying anyway, to let someone show you a different way of being, even when it terrified you, to believe that who you'd been didn't have to determine who you could become. Victoria had done that. She'd looked at her own reflection and decided she didn't like what she saw. And then she'd done the hardest thing possible. She'd changed it. Not overnight, not perfectly, but genuinely and completely. And in changing herself, she'd changed everything around her. That was what real leadership looked like. Not domination or control or making people fear you, but being brave enough to admit your mistakes, humble enough to learn from the people around you, and human enough to care about something beyond your own success. The hospital would continue to grow and change. There would be new challenges and new crises and new battles to fight. But the foundation was solid now, built on compassion instead of efficiency, on humanity instead of metrics, on the radical idea that taking care of people, really taking care of them, was worth more than any profit margin. Ethan pulled Victoria closer and felt her relax against him. In the bedroom down the hall, Chloe's empty bed waited for her return tomorrow, complete with the stuffed animals she was technically too old for, but refused to give up. In the kitchen, their terrible homemade cookies sat in a container on the counter. On the refrigerator, Chloe's latest drawing showed the three of them standing in front of the hospital, holding hands, labeled in her careful second-grade handwriting, "My family helps people." It was such a simple drawing, such a simple truth. But sometimes the simplest truths were the most important ones. You helped people. You showed up. You did the work even when it was hard. You admitted when you were wrong. You asked for help when you needed it. You let yourself be loved. You loved others in return. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. That was everything.